Welcome to The Calm Scientist. If you're here, it probably means you're ready to slow down, relax, and drift gently into the night with a head full of curiosity. Tonight, we're going to unravel one of the most quietly shocking truths about your everyday existence. Something so fundamental that once you understand it, you'll never quite experience the world the same way again. We're exploring the extraordinary reality that you have never, not even once in your entire life, actually touched anything at all. I hope this isn't terribly inconvenient for your plans to fall asleep tonight, because what we're about to discover might just be fascinating enough to keep your mind pleasantly occupied for a while. It's the kind of bedtime story only physics and philosophy could write together. A tale of invisible cushions, phantom sensations, and the remarkable ways your brain constructs the feeling of a solid world from signals that travel through empty space. Before we begin our gentle journey into this touchless universe, if you're enjoying this cozy exploration of reality's hidden layers, I'd be wonderfully grateful if you gave the video a like and subscribed. It really helps this peaceful little channel find its way to other curious minds who might enjoy drifting off to sleep while pondering the mysteries of existence. And if you're feeling sociable tonight, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the universe. I love picturing our scattered community of sleepy philosophers, stretching from quiet bedrooms in midnight cities to starlit rural homes, all connected by the same gentle curiosity about the nature of contact and connection. This video is here to relax you, to intrigue you just enough to make your thoughts soft and wandering. You won't need to remember any of this when you wake up tomorrow. Just let yourself float with me as we explore the invisible spaces between atoms, the electric forces that keep everything apart, and the beautiful illusion your nervous system creates to give you the feeling of touching the world around you. And just before we begin, this video is for relaxation and education. It is not medical advice or a substitute for professional care. Always look after yourself and sleep well. Let's start with something beautifully simple. Right now, as you listen to my voice, you're probably lying in bed, perhaps with your hand resting on a pillow, maybe touching the blanket that covers you, feeling the gentle pressure of your head against whatever you're resting on. The sensation of contact feels so immediate, so obviously real, so fundamentally true that questioning it seems almost absurd. Your fingers know the texture of fabric, your skin registers warmth and coolness, softness and firmness. When you press your palm against the mattress, you feel resistance, solidity, the undeniable presence of matter meeting matter. This is touch, contact, the most basic way we interact with our physical world. It seems like the most straightforward thing imaginable. But hold that thought gently, because as it turns out, even something as basic as touching is much more mysterious and strange than it appears. What feels like direct contact between your skin and the world around you is actually something far more elaborate, something that happens across invisible distances through forces that you cannot see or feel directly. The truth is that the atoms in your fingertips and the atoms in that pillow are never, not even for the briefest instant, actually making contact with each other. They're separated by empty space, pushing against each other through electric fields, like invisible magnets that repel each other before they can ever truly meet. The sensation of touch that seems so immediate and real is actually your brain's interpretation of electromagnetic forces acting across tiny but very real distances. It's a bit like two people in bumper cars who never quite collide but instead bounce off each other's magnetic fields, feeling the push and resistance without ever making physical contact. Except in this case, the magnetic fields are the electric charges of atoms, and the bumper cars are the fundamental particles that make up everything in your world, including you. Think about that for a moment. Every handshake you've ever shared, every hug you've ever given, every gentle touch you've ever experienced has been an elaborate dance of electromagnetic forces acting across empty space. You and everyone you've ever embraced have been like ships passing in the night, calling out to each other across the darkness but never quite reaching the same harbour. There's something quietly profound about this realization. In a world where we often feel disconnected, isolated, struggling to truly connect with others, it turns out that on the most fundamental level, everything in the universe exists in splendid isolation, forever separated by the invisible cushions of electromagnetic force that keep the atoms of your body from ever directly touching the atoms of anything else. But here's where things get even more interesting. This isn't a failure of contact or connection. This electromagnetic pushing and repelling is exactly what gives you the experience of a solid, touchable world. Without these invisible forces keeping everything at just the right distance, matter as we know it couldn't exist. Your body couldn't maintain its structure. The chair you're sitting on couldn't support your weight. The very concept of objects, of things with shape and substance, depends entirely on this fundamental impossibility of true atomic contact. Let's delve deeper into this remarkable phenomenon, starting with the basic architecture of atoms themselves. Picture an atom, if you will, not as the solid little ball that you might remember from old textbook diagrams, but as something far more ethereal and spacious. If an atom was scaled up to the size of a cathedral, the nucleus at its centre would be about the size of a marble sitting in the middle of that vast space, and the electrons would be tiny specks orbiting somewhere out near the walls. The rest, the overwhelming majority of what we call an atom, is empty space. Pure, empty space. Not emptiness in the sense of a vacuum that could be filled with something else, but fundamental emptiness, the basic structure of reality itself. When you touch your finger to your nose, you're bringing together two collections of mostly empty space, and the sensation of contact happens entirely in the minuscule electric fields that surround the particles floating in all that emptiness. But these electric fields, invisible as they are incredibly powerful. The electromagnetic force is one of the four fundamental forces that govern everything in the universe, and it's about 1 trillion times stronger than gravity. When the electrons in the atoms of your skin get close enough to the electrons in the atoms of your pillow, they push against each other with enormous force, creating what you experience as resistance, as solidity, as the feeling of something being there. It's more like pressing against an invisible cushion of force than touching a solid object. The closer the atoms get, the stronger the repulsion becomes, creating a barrier that feels absolutely solid and real, but is actually made of nothing but electric fields pushing through empty space. Your nervous system, remarkable as it is, translates this electromagnetic information into the sensation of texture, pressure, temperature, all the rich experiences that make up your sense of touch. This brings us to a fascinating question about the nature of sensation itself. If touch is really electromagnetic force acting at a distance, then what exactly is happening in your nervous system when you feel like you're touching something? How does your brain take these signals from electric fields and turn them into the immediate intimate experience of contact with the world? The story begins in your skin, in the thousands of specialized nerve endings that live just beneath the surface of your fingertips, your palms, everywhere that your body meets the world. These nerve endings are like tiny ambassadors, constantly sending reports back to your brain about the electromagnetic environment around them. They don't actually touch anything either, remember, but they're exquisitely sensitive to the forces that arise when atoms get very close together. When you run your finger along a surface, these nerve endings are detecting the varying intensities of electromagnetic repulsion as the atoms in your skin encounter atoms with different arrangements, different densities, different charges. A smooth surface creates a relatively even pattern of repulsion. A rough surface creates an irregular, constantly changing pattern as your atoms encounter peaks and valleys in the atomic landscape. Your brain receives this stream of electromagnetic information and performs one of its most remarkable tricks. It creates the experience of texture, of contact, of touching something outside yourself. The feeling of cotton against your skin, the coolness of metal, the give and resistance of flesh. These are all constructions, interpretations that your nervous system creates from patterns of force acting across empty space. Think of it as something like echolocation, the way dolphins and bats navigate by sound. They send out calls and interpret the echoes that come back, building a picture of their world from the patterns of reflected sound waves. Your sense of touch is similar, except instead of sound waves, you're using electromagnetic forces, and instead of interpreting echoes, your brain is interpreting the pushback that happens when the electric fields around your atoms encounter the electric fields around other atoms. But there's something even more remarkable happening here. Your brain doesn't just passively receive this information and translate it into sensation. It actively constructs the experience of a world that has the qualities of touch, solidity, texture. Your nervous system creates the feeling that your body ends at your skin, that there's a clear boundary between you and not you, that you make contact with things outside yourself. This is, when you think about it, an extraordinary accomplishment. Your brain takes information about forces acting across empty space and creates the vivid, immediate experience of a solid world full of objects that you can touch and manipulate. It creates the feeling of having a body with clear edges, of that body existing in a world of other solid things that push back when you push against them. There's something deeply moving about this realization. Every sensation of contact, every experience of touching and being touched, is a kind of collaborative creation between the electromagnetic forces of the universe and the interpretive powers of your nervous system. The world you experience through touch is both completely real and completely constructed, both a genuine interaction with forces outside yourself and a creative interpretation that exists only in your conscious experience. Meanwhile, philosophers have been puzzling over questions of touch and contact for centuries, often arriving at insights that seem to anticipate what modern physics has discovered about the electromagnetic nature of matter. Long before we understood atoms and electric fields, thinkers were already questioning whether the experience of touching really represents direct contact with the external world. René Descartes, writing in the 17th century, was fascinated by the problem of how the mind could interact with the physical world through the body. He imagined the pineal gland in the brain as the meeting point between mind and matter, but he struggled with the fundamental question of how something non-physical like consciousness could interface with something physical like a body. His famous thought experiment about phantom limbs, feelings of pain or sensation in arms or legs that have been amputated, pointed toward a crucial insight. If you can feel pain in a limb that no longer exists, then the experience of bodily sensation must be, at least in part, a creation of the mind, rather than a direct report from the external world. The ghost sensations that amputees experience suggested to Descartes that all bodily sensations might be more ghostly, more constructed than they appear. George Berkeley, the 18th century philosopher who famously argued that material objects exist only in the mind, had his own fascinating insights about touch. He noticed that the same object could feel different depending on the state of your skin. Put one hand in warm water and one in cold water, then put both hands in lukewarm water. The water will feel warm to the hand that was cold and cool to the hand that was warm. The same material reality creates different sensations depending on the condition of the perceiver. Berkeley used this observation to argue that qualities like warmth and coldness don't exist in objects themselves, but only in the mind that perceives them. What modern physics tells us is that Berkeley was more right than he knew. There are no qualities like warmth or texture or hardness in the electromagnetic forces that create our sensations of touch. These qualities exist only in the interpretive activity of nervous systems like ours. David Hume, always the skeptic, pointed out that we never actually experience objects directly, only the sensations that we attribute to objects. When you think you're touching a table, Hume argued, you're actually experiencing a collection of sensations, hardness, smoothness, coolness, and you're inferring that these sensations come from something called a table that exists independently of your experience of it. What Hume couldn't have known is how literally true his insight would turn out to be. You really never experience objects directly. You experience electromagnetic forces, and your brain constructs the experience of touching objects from patterns in those forces. The table, as an independent material reality, remains forever beyond direct experience, known only through the electromagnetic ambassadors that carry messages across the tiny but unbridgeable gaps between atoms. But let's delve even deeper into this mysterious realm of forces acting across empty space. To really understand why you've never touched anything, we need to explore the quantum mechanical nature of the electromagnetic interactions that create our everyday experience of contact and solidity. In the strange world of quantum mechanics, forces like electromagnetism don't work the way we might intuitively expect. Instead of being continuous pushes and pulls, they operate through the exchange of virtual particles, quantum messengers that carry force between atoms without ever being directly observable themselves. When the electrons in your skin get close to the electrons in your pillow, they don't push against each other like bumper cars. Instead, they exchange virtual photons, quantum particles of electromagnetic force that carry information about repulsion from one electron to the other. These virtual photons are like messages passed between atoms, saying, "Stay away, maintain your distance, don't come any closer." The exchange happens faster than light could travel the distance involved, and the particles themselves exist only in the quantum realm, never manifesting as anything you could observe directly. Yet this invisible quantum mechanical handshake is what creates the sensation of solidity, the feeling that your finger meets resistance when you press it against a surface. It's as if atoms are constantly engaged in an elaborate dance of quantum communication, sending and receiving messages that coordinate their positions relative to each other without ever making direct contact. Your experience of touching something is actually your nervous system's interpretation of this quantum conversation, this exchange of virtual particles that maintains the structure and spacing of matter. Think about the implications of this for a moment. Every sensation of contact you've ever had has been mediated by virtual particles that exist only in quantum superposition, never fully manifesting in the classical world you experience. The feeling of holding hands with someone you love is created by quantum mechanical forces exchanged between atoms that themselves are mostly empty space, guided by particles that exist only as possibilities until they are exchanged. There's something achingly beautiful about this picture. Connection, intimacy, the physical comfort of touch. All of it happens through invisible quantum messaging systems operating in the spaces between atoms. You and everything you've ever thought you touched are like quantum pen pals, forever exchanging letters made of virtual particles but never meeting face to face. But the strangeness goes even deeper than virtual particles and electromagnetic repulsion. When physicists talk about matter and what it's really made of, they often point out that what we call solid particles, electrons and protons and neutrons, aren't really solid at all. They're more like stable patterns in quantum fields, wave-like disturbances in the fundamental fabric of reality that have enough coherence and persistence to behave as if they were particles. An electron isn't a little ball with a surface that could theoretically touch other little balls. It's a quantum wave function, a mathematical description of probabilities and possibilities spread out over space. When two electrons interact, it's not two objects colliding, but two wave patterns interfering with each other, creating new patterns that we interpret as force and repulsion. This means that not only have you never touched anything, but the things you've never touched don't even exist as discrete objects in the way you imagine they do. Your skin and the pillow it's resting on are both collections of quantum wave patterns, probability clouds that interact with each other through the exchange of virtual particles that themselves exist only as quantum possibilities. Your brain takes all this quantum mechanical activity, this dance of probability waves and virtual particles and electromagnetic fields, and constructs from it the beautifully convincing illusion of a classical world made of solid objects that you can touch and manipulate. The reality underlying your experience is far stranger and more ethereal than the everyday world your senses present to you, yet your nervous system is so skilled at its interpretive work that you experience touching and being touched as immediate, intimate, and absolutely real. Let's take a closer look at some specific examples of how this works in your daily experience. Consider something as simple as picking up a coffee cup. What feels like a straightforward interaction between your hand and a solid object is actually an enormously complex quantum mechanical event involving billions of atoms exchanging virtual particles across microscopic distances. As your fingers approach the cup, the electrons in your skin begin to feel the electromagnetic field generated by the electrons in the ceramic or glass. Long before any kind of classical contact occurs, quantum mechanical forces are already at work creating zones of repulsion that will eventually manifest as the feeling of the cup's surface. When you close your fingers around the cup, you're not actually gripping a solid object. You're creating a configuration of electromagnetic forces that holds the cup in a stable position relative to your hand. The atoms in your skin and the atoms in the cup maintain their distance from each other, but the forces between them create a structure stable enough to lift the cup, to bring it to your mouth, to manipulate it as if it were a solid thing that you're directly controlling. But here's something even more remarkable. The same quantum mechanical principles that prevent your atoms from touching the atoms of the cup also prevent the atoms within the cup from touching each other. The cup itself, this object that seems so solid and integral, is held together entirely by electromagnetic forces acting between atoms that never make contact. The ceramic or glass maintains its shape not because its atoms are stuck together like pieces in a jigsaw puzzle, but because the electromagnetic forces between atoms create a stable pattern, a quantum mechanical structure that resists deformation. When you press on the cup with your finger, you're using electromagnetic forces to push against other electromagnetic forces, creating the experience of hardness and resistance without any actual touching taking place anywhere in the system. This perspective transforms how we might think about the nature of objects themselves. A cup, a table, your own body. These aren't things made of solid matter so much as they are stable patterns of electromagnetic force, quantum mechanical structures that maintain their form through the precise balancing of attractions and repulsions between atoms that float in mostly empty space. Your body, from this perspective, is a magnificently complex arrangement of electromagnetic forces that has learned to move through and manipulate other arrangements of electromagnetic forces. When you walk across a room, you're not a solid object moving through space, but a pattern of forces navigating among other patterns of forces, all of it held together and guided by the quantum mechanical rules that govern how virtual particles are exchanged between atoms. But the mystery deepens when we consider the role of consciousness in all this. Your brain, that 3-pound universe inside your skull, is itself a collection of atoms held together by electromagnetic forces, organized into patterns complex enough to create the experience of awareness, of being a self that observes and interacts with the world. This brain, made of atoms that never touch each other, somehow creates the experience of touching things outside itself. The neural activity that produces your sense of contact with the world happens through electrochemical signals, themselves governed by the same quantum mechanical principles that prevent any actual touching from occurring anywhere in your nervous system. When a nerve ending in your fingertip detects electromagnetic resistance and sends a signal to your brain, that signal travels along nerve fibers through the exchange of ions, charged particles that move according to electromagnetic forces. The message reaches your brain and triggers patterns of activity in neurons that communicate with each other through neurotransmitters released across synaptic gaps, tiny spaces where once again no actual contact occurs. Your brain receives this information and somehow, through processes that remain largely mysterious, creates the subjective experience of having touched something. The feeling of contact, the sensation of texture and pressure and temperature, emerges from patterns of neural activity in an organ that is itself made of atoms floating in empty space, connected only by electromagnetic forces and virtual particle exchanges. There's something almost magical about this process when you really contemplate it. Your experience of touching the world is created by a brain that cannot touch anything, including its own parts. Every sensation of contact is conjured into existence by neural processes that themselves operate through the same non-contact electromagnetic principles that govern everything else in the physical universe. This raises profound questions about the nature of conscious experience itself. If touching is really an interpretation that your brain creates from electromagnetic information, then what does this tell us about consciousness and its relationship to the physical world? Are you, as a conscious observer, fundamentally separate from the electromagnetic processes that create your experience of touching, or are you somehow identical with those processes? The question becomes even more intriguing when you consider that the electromagnetic forces that create your sense of touch are the same forces that organize your brain and make consciousness possible in the first place. You're not separate from the quantum mechanical universe that creates the illusion of contact. You are that universe, organized into a pattern complex enough to experience itself touching and being touched. Some philosophers and scientists have suggested that consciousness itself might be understood as a kind of electromagnetic phenomenon, patterns of information processing that emerge from the quantum mechanical activity of atoms in nervous systems. From this perspective, your experience of touching something would be one electromagnetic pattern recognizing and interpreting another electromagnetic pattern, all of it happening within the unified field of forces that makes up the physical universe. But let's explore how this understanding of touchless touching extends beyond philosophy into some of the practical mysteries of everyday experience. Have you ever wondered why different materials feel so different to your touch? Why metal feels cold, why fabric feels soft, why stone feels hard? The electromagnetic theory of contact gives us fascinating insights into these familiar sensations. When you touch metal, it feels cold, not because the metal itself is cold, but because metal conducts heat efficiently. The atoms in your skin are vibrating with thermal energy, and when they get close to the atoms in metal, electromagnetic forces allow that thermal energy to transfer quickly to the metal atoms. Your skin loses heat rapidly, and your nervous system interprets this as the sensation of coldness. But remember, no heat is actually flowing from your skin to the metal through direct contact. Instead, the quantum mechanical vibrations of atoms in your skin, their thermal motion, influences the quantum mechanical vibrations of nearby atoms in the metal through electromagnetic interactions. The energy transfers across the empty space between atoms, creating the experience of coolness without any substance actually moving from your body to the metal. Fabric feels soft because its structure allows the electromagnetic forces between your skin and the fabric to fluctuate and give way as you press against it. The atoms in fabric are arranged in loose, flexible patterns that can rearrange themselves in response to electromagnetic pressure from your skin atoms. Your nervous system interprets this yielding quality as softness, but what you're really detecting is the flexibility of electromagnetic structures, the way some arrangements of atomic forces can adapt and change more easily than others. Stone feels hard because its atoms are locked into rigid crystalline structures by very strong electromagnetic bonds. When the atoms in your skin encounter the atoms in stone, they meet electromagnetic resistance that doesn't give way, doesn't adapt or rearrange itself. The forces pushing back against your skin remain constant and strong, creating the sensation of hardness, of something that won't yield to pressure. But in every case, smooth or rough, hot or cold, hard or soft, you're experiencing the qualities of electromagnetic force patterns, not the qualities of solid matter. Texture is a property of how electromagnetic fields vary across space. Temperature is a property of how much thermal energy can transfer between electromagnetic systems. Hardness and softness are properties of how electromagnetic structures respond to pressure. Your sense of touch is really a sophisticated electromagnetic sensing system, exquisitely calibrated to detect and interpret the invisible forces that hold the atomic world together. You're constantly bathed in electromagnetic information about the patterns of matter around you, and your nervous system has evolved to translate this information into the rich, detailed experience of touching a material world. This perspective can help explain some of the stranger aspects of touch that we don't usually think about. Have you ever noticed that you can sense when your hand is very close to a surface, even before you feel contact? Some people can hold their hand near a wall and detect its presence before their skin encounters the electromagnetic resistance that creates the sensation of touching. This makes perfect sense from an electromagnetic perspective. The electric fields around atoms extend beyond what we think of as the surface of objects. As your hand approaches a wall, the electromagnetic environment around your skin changes subtly, and your nervous system can sometimes detect these changes even before the stronger repulsive forces kick in that create the sensation of solid contact. Similarly, this helps explain why some people seem to have more sensitive touch than others, or why your sense of touch can change depending on your state of attention or emotional condition. Since touch is really about detecting and interpreting electromagnetic information, anything that affects how your nervous system processes this information will affect your experience of contact with the world. When you're relaxed and attentive, your nervous system might be more sensitive to subtle electromagnetic changes, allowing you to notice textures and pressures that you might miss when you're distracted or tense. The physical reality, the electromagnetic forces between atoms, remains the same, but your conscious experience of touching can vary dramatically depending on how your brain interprets the information it receives. This also illuminates why touch can be so emotionally powerful, why physical contact with others can be so comforting or disturbing. When someone places their hand on your shoulder, you're not just receiving tactile information about pressure and warmth. You're detecting the electromagnetic signature of another living system, another arrangement of atoms organized into patterns complex enough to move purposefully and respond to their environment. Your nervous system exquisitely evolved to interpret electromagnetic information, can detect qualities in this contact that reveal something about the state of the other person. The slight tremor in their hand, the warmth of their skin, the gentle or urgent quality of their pressure, all of these are electromagnetic signals that your brain processes not just as physical sensations, but as information about intention, emotion, care, or threat. The comfort you feel when someone you love touches your hand is partly about the electromagnetic reality of two complex living systems recognizing each other through their force fields, communicating through the language of virtual particles and electric charges. The intimacy of touch, paradoxically, happens across the unbridgeable gaps between atoms, mediated by quantum mechanical forces that connect you to others without ever allowing true contact. But let's delve deeper into the historical development of these ideas, because the realization that touching might not involve actual contact has roots that go back much further than modern quantum mechanics. Ancient philosophers and mystics often intuited something strange about the nature of physical contact, even without the scientific framework to explain what they were sensing. The ancient Greek philosopher Democritus, who first proposed that everything was made of indivisible atoms, already suggested that the qualities we experience through touch, like hotness and coldness, sweetness and bitterness, exist only in convention and opinion, not in the atoms themselves. He imagined atoms as having only shape, size, and motion, with all other qualities being interpretations created by the mind. Democritus was remarkably prescient. What he intuited about atoms having only mechanical properties while other qualities exist in the mind anticipates what modern physics tells us about electromagnetic forces, creating experiences that don't exist in the forces themselves. The sweetness of honey, the roughness of bark, the coolness of water. These qualities emerge from how our nervous systems interpret electromagnetic information, not from properties inherent in the arrangements of atoms that create these sensations. The ancient Indian philosopher Nagarjuna, writing about concepts of emptiness and interdependence, argued that neither the sense organs nor the objects they encounter exist independently. He suggested that touch, like all sensations, arises from the interaction between perceiver and perceived, with neither having inherent existence on its own. This philosophical insight aligns beautifully with what quantum mechanics tells us about the relational nature of electromagnetic forces. There is no touching that exists independently of the relationship between atoms, no hardness or softness that exists apart from the interaction between electromagnetic field patterns. The qualities you experience through touch emerge from relationships between quantum systems, not from properties that objects possess in isolation. Medieval Islamic philosophers like Al-Ghazali explored the puzzle of how the soul could interact with the body through touch and sensation. They wondered how something spiritual and non-physical could receive information from the material world, and whether the experiences of touching might be more about the nature of consciousness than about the nature of matter. These questions take on new meaning when we understand that touching really is about interpretation, rather than direct contact. Your conscious experience of the material world is created by your brain's interpretation of electromagnetic information, but consciousness itself remains mysterious. What is it that interprets? What is it that experiences the sensation of touching? These questions are as profound now as they were 1,000 years ago, even though we now know more about the mechanisms involved. The scientific revolution brought new tools for investigating these questions, but also new puzzles. When Galileo distinguished between primary qualities like motion and shape, which he thought existed in objects themselves, and secondary qualities like colour and taste, which he thought existed only in the perceiver, he was grappling with the same fundamental questions about the relationship between objective reality and subjective experience. Galileo didn't know about electromagnetic forces, but his intuition that some qualities exist in objects while others exist in minds was pointing toward the truth that modern physics has revealed. The electromagnetic forces between atoms are arguably primary qualities, fundamental features of physical reality, but the experiences of touching, feeling texture and pressure and temperature, these are secondary qualities, interpretations created by nervous systems from patterns in electromagnetic information. Isaac Newton's work on forces and motion provided some of the mathematical tools that would eventually lead to our understanding of electromagnetism, though Newton himself thought of forces as mysterious actions at a distance that couldn't be explained in terms of mechanical contact. He was troubled by the idea that gravity could act across empty space without any medium to carry the force. If Newton had lived to see the development of electromagnetic theory, he might have been even more troubled to learn that all forces, not just gravity, act at a distance without any direct contact ever occurring. The solid mechanical universe that Newtonian physics seem to describe turns out to be an illusion created by forces acting across empty space, forces that we experience as contact and solidity, but that never involve actual touching between particles of matter. The development of electromagnetic theory in the 19th century, through the work of scientists like Michael Faraday and James Clerk Maxwell, began to reveal the true nature of the forces that create our experience of touching. Faraday's experiments with electric and magnetic fields showed that forces could act through space without any visible medium, while Maxwell's equations demonstrated that light itself was an electromagnetic wave. But it wasn't until the development of quantum mechanics in the 20th century that the full strangeness of electromagnetic interaction became clear. The discovery that forces operate through the exchange of virtual particles, that matter itself consists of quantum wave functions rather than solid particles, that observation and measurement play fundamental roles in determining physical reality. All of this revealed a universe far stranger and more ethereal than anyone had imagined. Quantum mechanics tells us that the electromagnetic forces creating your sense of touch are fundamentally uncertain and probabilistic. The virtual photons that carry force between atoms exist in quantum superposition until they are exchanged. The positions and momenta of the electrons that repel each other when you touch something cannot be simultaneously determined with perfect precision. The wave functions that describe atoms are spread out over space, rather than localized at specific points. This means that even our sophisticated understanding of why you've never touched anything is itself uncertain and probabilistic. The electromagnetic interactions that create the illusion of contact are themselves governed by quantum mechanical principles that resist precise description. Reality, at its most fundamental level, remains mysterious and strange, even when we can describe mathematically how the mystery manifests in our everyday experience. But let's explore some of the more philosophical implications of this touchless universe. If you've never actually touched anything, what does this mean for concepts like knowledge, connection, and intimacy? How do we understand love, comfort, violence, pleasure, all the experiences that seem to depend on physical contact when we realize that no physical contact ever actually occurs? One way to think about this is that the impossibility of true contact makes the experiences we have through electromagnetic interaction all the more remarkable and precious. The sensation of touching someone you love is not diminished by knowing that it's created by virtual particles exchanged across empty space. If anything, understanding the quantum mechanical complexity underlying this simple human experience makes it seem more miraculous, not less. Every caress, every embrace, every gentle touch that has ever comforted you has been a quantum mechanical achievement, a coordination of electromagnetic forces across microscopic distances that creates the experience of intimate connection. The fact that this happens without any actual contact doesn't make it less real or less meaningful. It makes it a triumph of the universe's ability to create experiences of connection and intimacy through the elegant dance of forces acting across empty space. There's also something profound about the realization that isolation and connection might be more complex than they initially appear. On one level, the fact that atoms never touch means that every conscious being exists in fundamental isolation, forever separated from direct contact with others. We're all islands of consciousness, surrounded by the empty space that prevents our atoms from ever truly meeting the atoms of those we love. But on another level, the electromagnetic forces that create the illusion of contact also reveal a deep interconnection with everything in the universe. The same fundamental forces that prevent your atoms from touching anything also connect you electromagnetically to everything around you. You exist within fields of electromagnetic force that extend throughout space, connecting you to every other arrangement of matter in the universe through invisible networks of influence and interaction. The virtual particles that mediate electromagnetic force don't recognize boundaries between self and other, between your body and the rest of the world. The quantum fields that create your sense of touching extend far beyond what you think of as your physical boundaries. From a certain perspective, you're not a separate object touching other separate objects, but a localized pattern of activity within electromagnetic fields that connect everything to everything else. This perspective can transform how we think about concepts like personal boundaries, individual identity, and the nature of relationship itself. If the fundamental forces that create your experience of being an individual also connect you invisibly to everything else in the universe, then perhaps the boundaries between self and other are less absolute than they appear. When you think you're touching someone else's hand, what's really happening is that two patterns of electromagnetic activity are interacting, creating new patterns that both participants experience as the sensation of contact. But the electromagnetic fields that create these patterns extend beyond what either person experiences as their individual body. In a sense, the touching is happening within a unified electromagnetic system that encompasses both people rather than between two separate systems that somehow make contact. This doesn't mean that individual identity is an illusion, but it does suggest that the boundaries of the self might be more fluid and complex than our everyday experience suggests. Your sense of being a distinct individual who touches other distinct individuals emerges from patterns of electromagnetic activity, but those same patterns connect you to the broader electromagnetic environment in ways that transcend the boundaries of what you experience as your separate body. The implications extend even further when we consider the role of information in electromagnetic interaction. When you touch something, you're not just detecting electromagnetic forces, you're receiving information about the patterns of matter around you, information that your brain uses to construct your model of the external world. This information travels through electromagnetic signals, but information itself is not electromagnetic. Information is something more abstract, patterns that can be encoded in electromagnetic activity but that exist independently of any particular physical substrate. When you touch something and gain information about its texture, temperature, and hardness, you're participating in an information exchange that transcends the physical mechanisms that make it possible. From this perspective, touching becomes a form of communication, a way that different patterns of organized matter share information about their structure and state. When you run your finger along a surface, you're not just detecting electromagnetic resistance. You're reading information that the surface is sharing about its atomic organization, its thermal state, its mechanical properties. This information exchange happens across the empty space between atoms, mediated by virtual particles that exist only as quantum possibilities. The information you receive through touching is created by electromagnetic interactions, but the meaning of that information, its significance for your understanding of the world around you, emerges from the interpretive activity of your consciousness. Your brain takes electromagnetic data and transforms it into knowledge about the world. The sensation of touching becomes a way of knowing, a method of investigation that allows consciousness to explore and understand the electromagnetic structures that surround it. In a touchless universe, touching becomes a form of remote sensing, a way of gathering information about reality across the unbridgeable gaps that separate all matter. But this raises even deeper questions about the nature of knowledge itself. If all your information about the physical world comes through electromagnetic interactions that don't involve direct contact, then what does it mean to really know something about the external world? How can you be certain that your experiences of touching correspond to anything that exists independently of your nervous system's interpretation of electromagnetic data? These are versions of ancient philosophical problems, but understanding the electromagnetic nature of touch gives them new urgency and precision. The problem of other minds, for instance, the question of how you can know that other people have conscious experiences similar to your own, becomes even more mysterious when you realize that all your evidence for other minds comes through electromagnetic interactions that create the illusion of contact with other bodies. When someone smiles at you, touches your hand, speaks words of comfort or love, you're receiving electromagnetic information about the behavior of another complex arrangement of atoms. But the consciousness that might lie behind that behavior, the inner experience of the person you think you're touching, remains forever beyond direct access. hidden behind the electromagnetic barriers that separate all conscious beings from each other. Yet this same electromagnetic isolation also provides the only possible bridge to other minds. The forces that prevent your atoms from touching the atoms of others also carry the information that allows you to recognize intelligence and emotion and intention in their behavior. The virtual particles that maintain the spaces between atoms also carry the signals that make communication possible. Your experience of touching another person's hand in greeting or comfort is a moment of electromagnetic communication across the void that separates all conscious beings. The warmth you feel, the gentle pressure, the slight variations in the texture of their skin, all of this is information about the state of another living system translated into conscious experience by your brain's interpretation of quantum mechanical forces. There's something almost telepathic about this process when you really consider it. Two conscious beings, forever separated by the empty space between atoms, somehow manage to communicate comfort, affection, intent and recognition through the exchange of virtual particles that exist only as quantum possibilities. The touching that never actually happens becomes a bridge between minds that might otherwise remain completely isolated from each other. But let's delve deeper into the specific mechanisms that create different types of touch sensation, because understanding these processes reveals even more about the remarkable ways your nervous system constructs the experience of a touchable world from electromagnetic information. Consider the sensation of pain, for instance. When you touch something that damages your skin, the experience of pain feels immediate and urgent, as if your body is directly detecting harm to itself. But even pain, that most immediate and personal of experiences, is created by electromagnetic forces acting across empty space. When tissue damage occurs, it releases various molecules that bind to receptors on pain-sensing nerve endings. But this binding doesn't involve direct contact either. The molecules and receptors interact through electromagnetic forces, creating changes in the shape of protein structures that open or close channels in nerve membranes. These channels allow charged particles, ions, to flow across the nerve membrane, creating electrical currents that travel along nerve fibers toward your brain. The entire process, from the initial tissue damage to the conscious experience of pain, involves nothing but electromagnetic interactions between atoms that never actually touch each other. Your brain receives this electromagnetic information and constructs from it the experience of pain, complete with its urgent quality, its precise localization, its emotional significance. The suffering you feel when you're hurt is real and important, but it's created by neural interpretations of electromagnetic data, not by direct detection of damage to solid matter. This perspective can be both troubling and comforting. Troubling because it suggests that even your most immediate bodily experiences are mediated by complex interpretive processes that could potentially be mistaken or manipulated. Comforting because it explains how pain, despite feeling so immediate and real, can sometimes be influenced by mental states, expectations, and understanding. The phantom limb sensations that amputees experience make perfect sense from this electromagnetic perspective. If pain is created by neural interpretation of electromagnetic signals, rather than by direct contact with damaged tissue, then the brain can create the experience of pain in limbs that no longer exist, as long as the neural pathways that normally interpret electromagnetic information from those limbs remain active. Similarly, this helps explain how pain can sometimes be reduced by understanding attention or placebo effects. Since pain is constructed by neural interpretation of electromagnetic information, anything that changes how the brain processes that information can change the experience of pain, even when the underlying electromagnetic activity remains the same. The same principles apply to pleasant sensations. The comfort of a warm bath, the pleasure of silk against your skin, the satisfaction of scratching an itch. All of these experiences are created by your brain's interpretation of electromagnetic forces between atoms that maintain their distance from each other throughout the interaction. When you sink into warm water, the atoms in your skin are detecting the increased thermal motion of atoms in the water through electromagnetic interactions that transfer energy without transferring matter. Your nervous system interprets this energy transfer as warmth and relaxation. but what's really happening is a quantum mechanical dance of virtual particles carrying information about thermal states across the empty spaces between atoms. The pleasure you feel is real and valuable, but it's created by consciousness interpreting electromagnetic data, not by your body making direct contact with anything external to itself. This doesn't diminish the pleasure or make it less authentic. If anything, it makes it more remarkable that the universe has evolved systems complex enough to create experiences of comfort and enjoyment from the elegant mathematics of electromagnetic force. But let's explore how this understanding might change our relationship to some of the more mundane aspects of touching and physical sensation. Think about something as simple as getting dressed in the morning. From an electromagnetic perspective, you're not putting solid clothes onto a solid body. You're arranging one pattern of electromagnetic forces around another pattern of electromagnetic forces, creating configurations that modify how your nervous system interprets the electromagnetic environment around your skin. Your clothes don't actually touch your body any more than your body actually touches anything else. Instead, the atoms in the fabric create electromagnetic fields that interact with the electromagnetic fields around the atoms in your skin, producing sensations of pressure, texture, warmth, and coverage. The cotton in your shirt is held together by electromagnetic forces between atoms that never touch each other. The dyes that give the fabric its color interact with light through electromagnetic processes. The comfort or discomfort you feel wearing the clothes depends on how the electromagnetic environment created by the fabric affects the electromagnetic sensing systems in your skin. You exist within layers of electromagnetic fields, patterns of force that extend from your skin outward through your clothes and into the air around you. What you experience as the boundary of your body, the place where you end and the rest of the world begins, is really just the region where the electromagnetic patterns that constitute your nervous system's model of self-transition into the electromagnetic patterns that constitute its model of the external world. From this perspective, getting dressed is like adjusting the electromagnetic environment that surrounds your consciousness, fine-tuning the patterns of force that will influence how your brain interprets tactile information throughout the day. The clothes you choose affect not just how you look, but how you feel, because they modify the electromagnetic landscape that your nervous system uses to construct your sense of embodied presence in the world. This same principle applies to the spaces you inhabit. The room you're in right now is not a container that holds your body, but an electromagnetic environment that influences your nervous system's interpretation of touch, temperature, air movement, and spatial position. The walls don't create a boundary by blocking solid matter, but by creating electromagnetic patterns that your brain interprets as obstacles, surfaces, and enclosures. When you reach out and feel that you can't move your hand through a wall, you're encountering electromagnetic resistance, but you're also encountering the limits of the electromagnetic environment that your brain can navigate safely. The wall stops your hand not by creating an impermeable barrier, but by creating electromagnetic forces strong enough to damage the delicate structures of your nervous system if you tried to push through them. Your sense of being located within a room, of existing in a defined space with boundaries and surfaces, emerges from your brain's interpretation of the electromagnetic environment around you. You're not really inside a container, but immersed in patterns of electromagnetic force that your consciousness interprets as spatial structure. This perspective can transform how you think about concepts like home, comfort, safety, and privacy. The spaces that feel most comfortable to you are those where the electromagnetic environment best supports your nervous system's preferred patterns of interpreting tactile and spatial information. A room feels cozy not because it's a small container, but because its electromagnetic properties create the kinds of sensory experiences that your brain associates with security and relaxation. Similarly, privacy and personal space might be understood as preferences for particular types of electromagnetic environments, configurations of force patterns that allow your nervous system to process information in ways that feel comfortable and manageable. When someone stands too close to you, they're not invading your physical space so much as disrupting the electromagnetic environment that your brain uses to maintain its sense of comfortable embodied presence. But let's delve deeper into the mysteries of how your brain actually constructs the experience of touch from electromagnetic information. The process is far more complex and creative than it might initially appear, involving multiple layers of interpretation and integration that transform raw electromagnetic data into the rich, detailed experience of touching a material world. The nerve endings in your skin are sensitive to different aspects of electromagnetic interaction. Some respond primarily to steady pressure, others to changes in pressure, others to vibration, temperature, or tissue damage. Each type of nerve ending is like a specialized electromagnetic sensor, tuned to detect particular patterns in the forces acting between atoms. But your brain doesn't simply receive separate streams of information from these different sensors and add them together to create a coherent experience of touch. Instead, it actively integrates the information, comparing and combining signals from different sources to construct interpretations that are more complex and nuanced than any single type of sensor could provide. When you run your finger across a surface, your brain is simultaneously processing information about texture from vibration-sensitive nerve endings, information about pressure from deformation-sensitive endings, information about temperature from thermal sensors, and information about the spatial position of your finger from sensors in your joints and muscles. But here's what's remarkable. Your brain doesn't just passively receive this information, it actively predicts what the sensory information should be based on your movement intentions, and then compares the actual sensory data to its predictions. When there's a mismatch between prediction and reality, your brain updates its model of what you're touching and how your body is positioned relative to it. This means that your experience of touching is always a collaborative creation between electromagnetic reality and neural prediction. Your brain is constantly generating hypotheses about what you're touching based on your movement intentions and previous experience, then testing these hypotheses against incoming electromagnetic data. When you reach out to pick up what you think is a heavy object but it turns out to be light, the surprise you feel is your brain updating its predictions about the electromagnetic environment. When you expect to touch something soft but encounter something hard, the jarring sensation comes from your nervous system's prediction error, its need to rapidly revise its model of the electromagnetic landscape around your hand. This predictive aspect of touch means that your experience of the material world is always partly a creation of your own expectations and assumptions. The electromagnetic forces between atoms provide the raw data, but your consciousness actively constructs the experience of touching specific objects with particular qualities. Your brain uses memory, expectation, and contextual information to interpret electromagnetic signals in ways that create meaningful experiences of contact with a coherent, stable material world. The same electromagnetic input can create different experiences of touching, depending on what your brain expects to encounter and how it contextualizes the sensory information. This helps explain why touch can be so powerfully influenced by psychological and emotional states. Since touching is partly a creative interpretation of electromagnetic data, rather than a passive reception of information from solid objects, anything that affects how your brain processes and contextualizes sensory information can change your experience of the material world. When you're anxious, the same electromagnetic input from clothing touching your skin might be interpreted as uncomfortable pressure or constriction. When you're relaxed, the same input might be interpreted as gentle, comforting contact. The electromagnetic forces remain the same, but your conscious experience of touching changes because your brain's interpretive context has changed. This also illuminates why touch can be so socially and culturally variable. Different cultures have different norms about appropriate touching, different associations between types of physical contact and emotional or social meanings. These cultural differences don't just affect how people behave around touch, they can actually affect how touch is experienced at the neurological level. If you grow up in a culture where certain types of touching are associated with comfort and affection, your brain may learn to interpret the electromagnetic signatures of those touches as pleasant and soothing. If you grow up in a culture where the same touches are associated with invasion or disrespect, your brain may interpret the identical electromagnetic information as uncomfortable or threatening. The electromagnetic forces acting between atoms remain the same across cultures, but the meaning that consciousness creates from those forces, the experience of what it feels like to touch and be touched, can vary dramatically depending on the cultural and personal context that shape how your brain interprets sensory information. But perhaps, most remarkably, This interpretive flexibility of the touching system allows for the possibility of technological augmentation and extension. Since touch is really about interpreting electromagnetic information, rather than making direct contact with solid objects, it's theoretically possible to create artificial systems that provide electromagnetic information to your nervous system in ways that create new types of touching experiences. Virtual reality systems that create convincing experiences of touching objects that don't exist work by providing electromagnetic information to your sensory systems that your brain interprets as contact with material surfaces. The objects you touch in virtual reality are nothing but patterns of electromagnetic force created by electronic devices, but your nervous system can interpret these patterns as convincingly real experiences of touching solid matter. Similarly, prosthetic devices that provide sensory feedback work by translating information about electromagnetic interactions into signals that can be interpreted by existing neural pathways. A prosthetic hand doesn't need to actually touch anything to provide the user with experiences of touching. It just needs to provide electromagnetic information that the brain can interpret as meaningful tactile sensations. These technologies reveal something profound about the nature of touching and embodied experience. If consciousness can create convincing experiences of touching from artificially generated electromagnetic signals, then the boundary between real and artificial touching might be less clear than it initially appears. This raises fascinating questions about the future of human experience and the nature of embodied consciousness. If touch is really about interpreting electromagnetic information, then it might be possible to expand our touching abilities beyond the limitations of biological bodies to create new types of sensory experiences that don't exist in natural touching systems. We might eventually be able to touch across vast distances by transmitting electromagnetic information through communication networks. We might be able to experience touching microscopic objects by amplifying and translating the electromagnetic signatures of atomic and molecular interactions. We might even be able to create entirely new types of touching sensations that no biological organism has ever experienced. But these technological possibilities also raise deeper questions about the relationship between consciousness and the physical world. If touch can be artificially created through technological manipulation of electromagnetic information, what does this tell us about the nature of conscious experience itself? Is consciousness fundamentally separate from the electromagnetic processes that create touching sensations, able to interpret artificial signals just as easily as natural ones? Or is consciousness somehow identical with patterns of electromagnetic activity, so that creating artificial touching experiences is really just extending and modifying the natural electromagnetic processes that already constitute conscious experience? These questions take us to the heart of some of the deepest mysteries in philosophy and science: the nature of consciousness, the relationship between mind and matter, the question of whether subjective experience can be fully explained in terms of physical processes. The fact that you've never actually touched anything provides a unique window into these mysteries. If touching, one of our most immediate and basic experiences of the physical world, is really a creative interpretation of electromagnetic information, rather than direct contact with solid matter, then perhaps all conscious experience is more constructed, more interpretive, more removed from direct access to reality than we usually assume. But rather than making conscious experience seem less real or less important, this perspective might suggest that consciousness plays a more active and creative role in reality than we typically imagine. The world you experience through touch is neither a pure illusion nor a passive reflection of independent physical reality. It's a collaborative creation between the electromagnetic structure of the universe and the interpretive powers of consciousness. The touching that never actually happens creates real experiences, real knowledge, real connections between conscious beings. The illusion of contact generates authentic intimacy, genuine comfort, meaningful information about the structure of the world. The electromagnetic forces that prevent your atoms from ever meeting other atoms also create the experiences of touching that make love, knowledge, art, and all human connection possible. In this touchless universe, consciousness emerges as a remarkable phenomenon, a pattern of organization complex enough to create experiences of contact, intimacy, and material interaction from the quantum mechanical dance of virtual particles acting across empty space. We are islands of awareness in an ocean of electromagnetic force, forever separated from direct contact with anything outside ourselves, yet connected through the invisible networks of influence that make touching and feeling and knowing possible. But as we continue our exploration of this remarkable truth about the untouchable nature of reality, we begin to encounter even deeper mysteries about the role that consciousness itself might play in creating not just the experience of touching, but the very structure of the physical world that generates touching sensations. This brings us to some of the most puzzling aspects of quantum mechanics and their implications for understanding the nature of touching and material interaction. In the quantum mechanical world that underlies all touching sensations, the act of observation and measurement plays a fundamental role in determining physical reality. Before a quantum system is observed or measured, it exists in what physicists call superposition, a state where all possible outcomes coexist simultaneously. Only when the system interacts with a measuring device or conscious observer does it collapse into a definite state with specific properties. This suggests that consciousness might not just interpret electromagnetic information to create touching sensations, but might actually participate in determining the electromagnetic reality that generates those sensations in the first place. When you reach out to touch something, your conscious intention to touch might be part of the quantum mechanical process that determines the specific electromagnetic interactions that will occur. The virtual particles that carry force between atoms exist in quantum superposition until they are exchanged. The positions and properties of electrons that create electromagnetic repulsion are uncertain until they're measured or observed. The very electromagnetic forces that create your sensation of touching might not have definite properties until consciousness becomes involved in the process. From this perspective, touching becomes not just a way of receiving information about an independent physical world, but a way of participating in the creation of that world. Your consciousness doesn't just interpret electromagnetic reality. It might be part of the process that brings specific electromagnetic interactions into existence. This would mean that the boundary between observer and observed, between consciousness and the physical world, between the toucher and the touched, is much more fluid and complex than our everyday experience suggests. When you touch something, you're not just detecting pre-existing electromagnetic forces, you might be participating in a quantum mechanical process that creates those forces in the act of touching. The implications of this perspective are staggering. It suggests that consciousness is not separate from the physical world, but intimately involved in creating the physical reality it appears to observe. The touching that seems to happen between your body and external objects might really be consciousness interacting with itself through the medium of quantum mechanical processes. But let's explore how this quantum mechanical perspective on touching connects to some of the ancient philosophical and mystical traditions that have long suggested that the boundaries between self and world, between toucher and touched, are less solid than they appear. Many contemplative traditions have spoken of experiences where the sense of being a separate self, touching external objects, dissolves into a more unified awareness. Mystics have described states of consciousness where the boundaries between body and environment, between self and other, seem to disappear, revealing an underlying unity that transcends the ordinary experience of discrete objects in contact with each other. From the perspective of quantum mechanics and electromagnetic theory, these mystical insights might be pointing towards something profound about the actual nature of reality. If touching really involves consciousness participating in quantum mechanical processes that create electromagnetic interactions, then the ordinary experience of being a separate, self-touching external objects might indeed be a construction that obscures a deeper unity. The atoms that constitute your body, and the atoms that constitute everything around you, are all patterns of activity in the same underlying quantum fields. The electromagnetic forces that create your sensation of touching are aspects of the same fundamental fields that connect everything in the universe. The consciousness that interprets these forces as touching sensations might itself be an emergent property of the same quantum mechanical processes that create the forces. From this perspective, when you think you're touching something external to yourself, what's really happening is that one pattern of quantum field activity is interacting with another pattern, both arising from and returning to the same underlying quantum reality. The separation between toucher and touched, between self and world, between consciousness and matter, might be conceptual divisions that consciousness creates within an essentially unified quantum mechanical process. This doesn't mean that individual identity is purely illusory, or that the practical distinctions between self and other are meaningless. The patterns of quantum field activity that constitute your body and consciousness are genuinely different from the patterns that constitute other objects and other conscious beings. The electromagnetic interactions that create touching sensations do provide real information about structures and relationships in the physical world. But it does suggest that these distinctions might be more fluid and interdependent than our ordinary experience suggests. You're not a solid object moving through a world of other solid objects, making contact with them through mechanical collision. You're a pattern of consciousness and electromagnetic activity interacting with other patterns within a unified quantum mechanical reality. The touching that never actually happens at the atomic level becomes, from this perspective, a way that consciousness explores and interacts with itself through the medium of electromagnetic forces. When you touch another person's hand, two patterns of aware electromagnetic activity are recognizing and communicating with each other within the unified field of quantum reality that encompasses everything. This perspective can transform how we understand concepts like empathy, compassion, and love. If consciousness and matter are both aspects of the same underlying quantum mechanical reality, then the electromagnetic forces that create touching sensations are also the forces that connect all conscious beings at the most fundamental level. When you feel compassion for someone who is suffering, you're not just emotionally responding to information about another separate being. You're recognizing yourself in another pattern of the same conscious electromagnetic activity that constitutes your own awareness. The electromagnetic forces that would create touching sensations, if you reached out to comfort them, are already connecting you through the quantum fields that underlie both your consciousness and theirs. The untouchable nature of atomic reality becomes, paradoxically, the basis for the deepest possible connection between conscious beings. Because no actual touching ever occurs, all touching is mediated by consciousness interpreting electromagnetic information. This means that the quality of touching, the meaning and significance of physical contact, depends entirely on the quality of consciousness that interprets the electromagnetic interactions. When someone touches you with genuine love and care, the electromagnetic forces acting between your atoms are the same as when someone touches you with indifference or hostility. But the consciousness that interprets these forces creates entirely different experiences of touching. Love and care transform the meaning of electromagnetic information, creating experiences of touching that convey warmth, safety, acceptance, and connection. This suggests that the development of consciousness, the cultivation of qualities like compassion, wisdom, and love, directly affects the quality of touching experiences, both for yourself and for others. As consciousness becomes more skillful at interpreting electromagnetic information with love and understanding, the touchless touching that constitutes all physical contact becomes a more powerful medium for connection and healing. But let's delve deeper into the specific ways that different states of consciousness can transform the experience of touching, because this reveals something profound about the relationship between awareness and electromagnetic reality. Consider the difference between touching something when you're distracted and preoccupied versus touching the same thing when you're fully present and attentive. The electromagnetic forces acting between atoms remain identical, but the conscious experience of touching can be completely different. When you're distracted, your brain might process electromagnetic information in a routine, habitual way, creating minimal conscious experience of texture, temperature, or pressure. The touching happens, but consciousness doesn't fully engage with the electromagnetic information, so the experience remains dim and forgettable. When you're fully present and attentive, the same electromagnetic information becomes rich with detail and meaning. You notice subtle variations in texture, slight changes in temperature, the precise quality of pressure and resistance. The electromagnetic forces haven't changed, but consciousness is now fully engaged with interpreting and experiencing the information they provide. This suggests that the depth and richness of touching experiences depends not just on the electromagnetic properties of what you're touching, but on the quality of attention and awareness that consciousness brings to interpreting electromagnetic information. Mindfulness and presence don't just change how you think about touching, they change what touching actually feels like. Contemplative traditions have long recognized this connection between awareness and sensory experience. Meditation practices that cultivate refined attention often lead to enhanced sensitivity to physical sensations, including more subtle and nuanced experiences of touching. Practitioners report that as their attention becomes more stable and refined, they begin to notice aspects of touching that were previously invisible to ordinary consciousness. From an electromagnetic perspective, this makes perfect sense. The information available through touching is extraordinarily rich and complex, but consciousness typically processes only a small fraction of what's available. Electromagnetic interactions between atoms contain information about molecular structure, thermal states, electrical properties, mechanical stress, chemical composition, and countless other aspects of material reality. Your nervous system is constantly receiving this information, but consciousness usually focuses on only the most immediately relevant aspects for practical navigation and manipulation of the physical environment. Contemplative training can expand the bandwidth of conscious attention, allowing awareness to engage with more of the electromagnetic information that's always been available but typically remains below the threshold of conscious experience. This expanded sensitivity can transform touching from a merely practical activity into a way of investigating and appreciating the electromagnetic complexity of material reality. Every surface becomes a landscape of molecular activity. Every texture reveals information about atomic structure and organization. Every temperature change provides insight into the thermal dynamics of matter. But contemplative exploration of touching often leads to even more profound discoveries about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to electromagnetic reality. Advanced practitioners in various traditions report experiences where the ordinary boundaries between the body that touches and the objects being touched begin to dissolve. In these experiences, touching becomes less like one object making contact with another object and more like consciousness recognizing itself in different forms. The electromagnetic information that normally creates the experience of touching external surfaces begins to be experienced as variations within a unified field of awareness, rather than contact between separate entities. Practitioners describe states where the hand that touches and the surface being touched are both experienced as modifications of the same conscious space. The electromagnetic forces that create the sensation of touching are still present, but consciousness no longer interprets them as evidence of separate objects making contact. Instead, they're experienced as the play of awareness within itself. These reports align remarkably with what quantum mechanics tells us about the fundamental nature of electromagnetic interactions. If consciousness is somehow intrinsic to or emergent from quantum mechanical processes, then the touching that consciousness creates by interpreting electromagnetic forces might indeed be consciousness exploring and recognizing itself through the medium of quantum field interactions. The untouchable nature of atomic reality creates the perfect conditions for these kinds of recognition experiences. Because no actual contact ever occurs, all touching sensations are created by consciousness interpreting information about electromagnetic relationships. When consciousness becomes sufficiently refined and unified, it can begin to recognize that the interpreter and the interpreted, the toucher and the touched, the electromagnetic forces and the awareness that experiences them are all aspects of the same underlying reality. But these insights about the deeper nature of touching and consciousness also have practical implications for how we understand and work with the physical pain, pleasure, and healing. If touching sensations are created by consciousness interpreting electromagnetic information, then interventions that affect the quality of consciousness can directly influence experiences of physical comfort and discomfort. This helps explain why practices like meditation, visualization, and various forms of energy healing can sometimes have powerful effects on physical sensations, even when they don't directly manipulate the electromagnetic forces acting between atoms. By changing how consciousness processes and interprets electromagnetic information, these practices can transform the felt experience of touching, pain, pressure, and other physical sensations. It also illuminates why the social and emotional context of touching can have such powerful effects on physical healing. When someone touches you with genuine care and healing intention, they're not just providing mechanical pressure or temperature change, they're offering their consciousness as a supportive context for your consciousness to interpret electromagnetic information in ways that promote healing and well-being. The electromagnetic forces acting between your atoms and their atoms remain the same regardless of their intention, but the quality of consciousness they bring to the interaction can influence how your consciousness processes the electromagnetic information, potentially creating more healing and beneficial experiences of touching. This perspective opens up fascinating possibilities for understanding and developing more effective approaches to physical healing and pain management. Instead of thinking only about mechanical interventions that change the electromagnetic forces acting on tissues, we might also focus on interventions that help consciousness interpret electromagnetic information in more skillful and beneficial ways. But perhaps, most profoundly, understanding the untouchable nature of reality can transform our relationship to the fundamental loneliness and isolation that seems built into conscious existence. The fact that your atoms can never actually touch the atoms of another person might initially seem to confirm our deepest fears about separation and disconnection. Yet, when we understand that this apparent isolation is actually the condition that makes all connection possible, the perspective shifts dramatically. Because no actual touching ever occurs, all experiences of touching are created by consciousness interpreting electromagnetic information. This means that the quality of connection, intimacy, and understanding between conscious beings depends entirely on the quality of consciousness they bring to their interactions. The electromagnetic forces that create touching sensations are neutral information carriers. They become expressions of love, care, comfort, or healing only when consciousness interprets them in those ways. This means that developing more loving, compassionate, and wise consciousness directly enhances your ability to create meaningful connections with others through the medium of electromagnetic interaction. The untouchable universe becomes a canvas for consciousness to paint experiences of connection and intimacy. The empty space between atoms becomes the stage where consciousness performs the miracle of recognizing itself in apparently separate forms. The virtual particles that mediate electromagnetic forces become the messenger system through which conscious beings communicate love, understanding, and mutual recognition. From this perspective, the fact that you've never actually touched anything is not a limitation or a source of existential isolation. It's the fundamental condition that allows consciousness to create experiences of touching that transcend mere mechanical contact between solid objects. The impossibility of true atomic contact creates the possibility for forms of connection and intimacy that are far richer and more meaningful than simple collision between pieces of matter could ever provide. Every gentle touch, every comforting embrace, every healing contact you've ever experienced has been a quantum mechanical miracle, a coordination of electromagnetic forces across empty space that creates the experience of connection without any actual contact ever occurring. The love you felt through touching and being touched has been consciousness recognizing itself across the unbridgeable gaps that separate all matter, using electromagnetic information to create experiences of unity and intimacy within apparent separation. In the deepest sense, the untouchable nature of reality reveals touching to be a fundamentally spiritual activity, a way that consciousness explores and expresses itself through the elegant mathematics of electromagnetic force. Every sensation of contact is a moment of recognition. Every experience of touching is an opportunity for consciousness to discover its own nature, reflected in the quantum mechanical processes that create the illusion of a material world. As we begin to draw our exploration toward a natural resting point, though we've really only begun to scratch the surface of this profound mystery, we might reflect on how this understanding of untouchable touching could influence your relationship to the physical sensations you experience as you drift towards sleep tonight. Your body resting against the mattress, your head settling into the pillow, the gentle pressure of blankets against your skin, all of these touching sensations that seem so solid and immediate are actually consciousness interpreting electromagnetic forces acting across empty space. The comfort you feel, the sense of being supported and held, emerges from your brain's skillful interpretation of virtual particle exchanges between atoms that maintain their eternal separation. But understanding the electromagnetic nature of these sensations doesn't diminish their reality or significance. If anything, it reveals them to be even more remarkable and precious. The comfort of your bed is not just mechanical support, but a quantum mechanical embrace, an arrangement of electromagnetic forces that consciousness interprets as safety, warmth, and rest. The very act of lying down to sleep involves consciousness using electromagnetic information to create the experience of surrender, of letting go, of allowing the body to rest while awareness prepares to journey into dreams. The touching sensations that accompany falling asleep are consciousness using the language of electromagnetic force to communicate with itself about relaxation, comfort, and the transition between waking and sleeping states. As your breathing slows and your muscles relax, the changing patterns of electromagnetic information create a feedback loop with consciousness, each deeper level of physical relaxation, allowing consciousness to interpret touching sensations in ways that promote even deeper rest and peace. The untouchable nature of all physical contact becomes the medium through which consciousness lullabies itself towards sleep. But our journey through the untouchable universe has really only begun. We've explored the basic electromagnetic principles that prevent actual atomic contact, the ways consciousness constructs touching sensations from quantum mechanical information, and some of the philosophical and spiritual implications of living in a world where no true contact ever occurs. There remain vast territories of mystery to explore. The role of electromagnetic fields in creating experiences of space and embodiment, the ways different cultures and historical periods have understood the nature of contact and connection, the implications of untouchable reality for concepts of identity and relationship, the connections between electromagnetic theory and various wisdom traditions' insights about the nature of self and world. We've touched, without actually touching, on questions that reach into the deepest mysteries of consciousness, quantum mechanics, and the nature of reality itself. Each insight opens onto new landscapes of wonder and investigation. Each answer reveals new questions that invite even deeper exploration. The tragic solitude of matter runs deeper than we might first imagine. Every atom in your body, every particle that comprises the chair you sit in, the air you breathe, the ground beneath your feet, exists in a state of fundamental isolation. This is not the loneliness of a person in an empty room, or the solitude of being the last person awake in a sleeping house. This is something more profound, more universal, more quietly heartbreaking. It is the loneliness built into the very architecture of reality itself. Picture, if you will, the atom that forms part of your fingertip right now. This tiny building block of matter carries within its structure an emptiness so vast that if we scaled it up to the size of a cathedral, its nucleus would be no larger than a marble sitting in the center of that sacred space. The electrons, those mysterious particles that orbit this nuclear core, would be dancing somewhere out near the cathedral walls, flickering in and out of existence in patterns that even our most sophisticated mathematics can only describe in terms of probability clouds. Between the nucleus and these dancing electrons lies nothing but empty space, a void so complete that it makes the vacuum of outer space seem crowded by comparison. This atom, this fundamental unit of your physical being, has never in its entire existence truly contacted another atom. Not once. Not ever. As your finger approaches the surface of your desk, as the molecules of your skin draw near to the molecules of the wood or metal or plastic beneath, they engage in an intricate dance of repulsion. The electromagnetic fields that surround each atom push against one another with forces that are, in the grand scheme of physics, absolutely insurmountable. These fields create barriers more absolute than any wall, more impenetrable than any fortress, more complete than any isolation chamber ever devised. The electrons in the atoms of your fingertip begin to feel the electromagnetic influence of the electrons in the atoms of the desk surface when they are still separated by distances that, on the atomic scale, are enormous. These particles, these fundamental constituents of matter, experience what we might call a mutual awareness of each other long before any conventional notion of contact could occur. They push against each other through the medium of electromagnetic force, creating the sensation we interpret as solidity, as resistance, as the satisfying click of contact. But this pushing, This resistance, this apparent contact, occurs across a gap of empty space that neither particle can ever cross. Consider the implications of this for a moment. The keyboard beneath your fingers right now, the coffee cup you lifted to your lips this morning, the hand of a loved one you held yesterday, the ground you walked upon, the clothes against your skin, every single tactile experience of your entire life has been an elaborate illusion constructed by electromagnetic forces operating across unbridgeable gaps. You have lived your entire existence as a being made of particles that have never once made direct contact with any other particle in the universe. The very concept of contact, of touching, of physical connection, is revealed to be a kind of collective hallucination generated by the sophisticated sensory apparatus we call our nervous system. This electromagnetic repulsion that creates our sense of touch operates according to principles that are both elegantly simple and profoundly mysterious. When we examine the mathematics that govern these interactions, we discover equations that describe forces of infinite range but rapidly diminishing strength. The electromagnetic field generated by a single electron extends theoretically to the very edges of the observable universe. Every electron in your body is, in some infinitesimally small way, influencing every other charged particle in existence. The boundaries we perceive between objects, between ourselves and the world, between one thing and another, are not boundaries at all but regions where electromagnetic forces create the appearance of separation. The tragic beauty of this universal isolation becomes even more poignant when we consider the scale at which it operates. The distances involved in atomic repulsion are measured in angstroms, units so small that 10 billion of them would fit across the width of a single meter. At this scale, the gap between your skin and the surface you believe you are touching is not just significant, but enormous. If we could magnify this interaction to human proportions, it would be like two people standing on opposite sides of a vast canyon, shouting across the emptiness and calling it conversation, feeling the echo of their voices bouncing back and interpreting this as the warmth of human contact. But the isolation runs even deeper than the spaces between atoms. Within each atom itself lies a solitude so complete it challenges our very conception of substance. The nucleus, that dense core where nearly all of an atom's mass resides, occupies roughly 1/1,000,000,000th of the atom's total volume. If an atom were the size of a baseball stadium, its nucleus would be smaller than a marble sitting at the center of the field. The rest of that vast space, the space that gives matter its apparent solidity, contains nothing but the strange mathematical entities we call electron orbitals, probability clouds that describe where an electron might be found if we were to look for it, but which tell us nothing about where it actually is at any given moment. These electrons themselves exist in a state of isolation that transcends even the lonely separation between atoms. According to our current understanding of quantum mechanics, electrons are point particles, objects with no measurable size, no internal structure, no substance in any classical sense. They are, in effect, mathematical abstractions made manifest, pure probability and energy with no spatial extent whatsoever. The idea that such entities could touch anything, could make contact with any other object in any meaningful sense, becomes not just impossible but conceptually incoherent. You cannot touch what has no size, cannot contact what has no substance, cannot connect with what exists only as mathematical possibility. The electromagnetic forces that create our illusion of touch operate through the exchange of virtual particles called photons. These photons are themselves massless, sizeless entities that exist only for the briefest instants before being absorbed or re-emitted by the charged particles they affect. The force you feel when you press your hand against a wall is the result of countless trillions of these virtual photons carrying momentum between the electrons in your skin and the electrons in the wall's surface. But these photons, these messengers of electromagnetic force, never themselves make contact with anything. They exist in a realm of pure interaction, pure information exchange, pure mathematical relationship with no physical substance to ground them in our intuitive understanding of matter and contact. This exchange of virtual photons creates what physicists call the Pauli exclusion principle in action. Two electrons cannot occupy the same quantum state, cannot exist in the same place at the same time, cannot merge or combine or touch in any way that resembles our everyday understanding of these concepts. They are forever forbidden from true proximity by the fundamental laws that govern quantum reality. It is as though the universe has a built-in prohibition against intimacy at the most basic level, a cosmic loneliness written into the very equations that describe how matter behaves. The tragedy of this universal isolation becomes even more profound when we consider the role it plays in creating the very possibility of existence as we know it. Without this electromagnetic repulsion, without this absolute prohibition against contact, matter as we understand it could not exist. Atoms would collapse into their nuclei, creating a universe of pure nuclear matter with the density of neutron stars. The delicate structures that allow for chemistry, for biology, for consciousness itself, depend entirely upon the maintenance of these unbridgeable gaps between particles. Our existence is predicated upon separation, our consciousness built upon a foundation of cosmic loneliness. The surfaces we touch, the textures we feel, the sensations of hot and cold, rough and smooth, hard and soft, all emerge from the complex patterns of electromagnetic interaction occurring across these microscopic voids. When you run your fingers across silk, you're feeling the way electrons in your skin respond to the specific arrangement of electromagnetic fields created by the molecular structure of the silk fibers. When you touch ice and feel its coldness, you're experiencing the way the electromagnetic interactions between your skin and the ice surface extract thermal energy from the molecules in your fingertips. When you feel the roughness of sandpaper, you're sensing the irregular electromagnetic landscape created by the chaotic arrangement of abrasive particles. All of these sensations, every tactile experience that has ever contributed to your understanding of the physical world, emerges from electromagnetic interactions occurring across gaps of empty space. The richness of tactile experience, the subtle differences between the touch of water and oil, between cotton and wool, between the smooth bark of a beech tree and the rough bark of an oak, all of this emerges from variations in how electromagnetic fields interact across the unbridgeable distances that separate all matter at the atomic level. Consider the profound loneliness of a carbon atom in your skin as it approaches a carbon atom in the graphite of your pencil. These atoms, identical in their fundamental nature, made of the same subatomic particles, governed by the same quantum mechanical laws, can never truly meet. They will approach each other until their electron clouds begin to overlap in the complex mathematical sense that governs quantum mechanical interactions, but they will never touch, never merge, never achieve the contact that their identical nature might seem to promise. They remain forever separate, forever isolated, forever alone in their individual quantum states. This same tragic separation extends to every level of physical reality. The molecules that make up your DNA have never touched the molecules that make up the proteins they encode. The hemoglobin molecules in your blood that carry oxygen to your tissues never make direct contact with the oxygen molecules they transport. The neurotransmitter molecules that carry signals between your brain cells never touch the receptor molecules they activate. Every biological process, every chemical reaction, every physical interaction in your body and in the world around you occurs through electromagnetic forces operating across gaps of empty space. The water molecules in your morning coffee, as they flow past your tongue, never touch the taste bud molecules that detect their presence. The photons of light that allow you to see these words never contact the molecules in your retina that respond to their electromagnetic influence. The sound waves that carry music to your ears never touch the molecules in your eardrum that translate their pressure variations into neural signals. Every sense, every perception, every way you have of knowing the physical world depends upon interactions that occur without contact, communication that happens across unbridgeable distances, information transfer that takes place through the medium of empty space. But perhaps the most profound aspect of this cosmic loneliness is the way it extends to human relationships themselves. When you hold the hand of someone you love, when you embrace a friend, when you comfort a child with a gentle touch, the actual physical reality of these moments involves trillions of atoms in your skin, being held forever apart from trillions of atoms in their skin by electromagnetic forces that make true contact impossible. The warmth you feel is the result of increased molecular motion in your skin as thermal energy transfers through electromagnetic interactions. The softness you perceive comes from the way their skin's molecular structure creates patterns of electromagnetic resistance that your nervous system interprets as texture. The sense of connection, of closeness, of intimate contact emerges from electromagnetic field interactions occurring across microscopic gaps that might as well be cosmic distances on the scale at which atoms exist. Every kiss has been an exchange of electromagnetic information across unbridgeable gaps. Every caress has been a dance of repulsive forces creating the illusion of contact. Every moment of physical intimacy in human history has been built upon the fundamental impossibility of true touch. We are, each of us, forever isolated within the electromagnetic boundaries of our own atomic structure, forever unable to truly reach across the void that separates all matter from all other matter in the universe. This realization might seem to drain the meaning from human touch, to render physical intimacy meaningless, to reduce the comfort of a mother's embrace to mere electromagnetic field interactions. But there is something deeply beautiful in understanding that what we experience as touch represents such a sophisticated illusion, such an elegant translation of electromagnetic forces into meaningful human experience. Our nervous systems have evolved to interpret these field interactions in ways that create not just the sensation of contact, but the emotional reality of connection, comfort, and love. The skin cells in your fingertips contain specialized mechanoreceptor neurons that respond to the minute deformations caused by electromagnetic repulsion when you touch a surface. These neurons translate the purely physical phenomenon of atomic-level force interactions into electrical signals that travel to your brain, where they are processed by neural networks that have been shaped by millions of years of evolution to extract meaning, emotion, and information from these signals. The result is not just the bare fact of electromagnetic interaction, but the rich, complex, emotionally resonant experience we call touch. When a parent touches a crying child, the electromagnetic interactions between their atoms trigger complex cascades of neural activity that reduce stress hormones, release endorphins, and activate brain regions associated with comfort and security. The child's nervous system interprets these field interactions not just as physical contact, but as safety, love, and protection. The parent's nervous system responds to the electromagnetic feedback from the child's skin with its own complex patterns of neural activation that create feelings of connection, nurturing, and love. What begins as atomic-level repulsion becomes, through the alchemy of nervous system processing, one of the most profound and meaningful experiences possible for human beings. This transformation of electromagnetic interaction into emotional experience reveals something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. Our awareness does not simply detect the electromagnetic forces operating between atoms, it interprets them, gives them meaning, translates them into the rich phenomenology of human experience. In doing so, consciousness bridges the gap that physics tells us can never be bridged. Through the mysterious process of conscious experience, the isolated atoms of one person's body somehow become connected to the isolated atoms of another person's body in ways that transcend the electromagnetic forces that keep them forever apart. But the loneliness built into the structure of matter extends beyond even these personal interactions to encompass the entire cosmos. Every star in the night sky is held together by gravitational forces that operate across empty space, never requiring direct contact between the particles they affect. Every planet orbits its star through gravitational interaction that spans millions or billions of miles of vacuum. Every galaxy moves through space in response to the gravitational influence of other galaxies separated by distances so vast that light takes millions of years to travel between them. The universe itself is held together by forces that operate across emptiness, creating structure and relationship without ever requiring true contact between the fundamental particles from which everything is made. The hydrogen atoms that formed in the first few minutes after the Big Bang, the atoms that eventually became part of the first stars, that were forged in stellar cores into heavier elements, that were scattered by supernovae across interstellar space, that eventually condensed into new stars and planets and ultimately into your own body. These atoms have been on a 13.8 billion year journey through space and time without ever once making contact with any other atom. They have participated in the formation of countless structures, from the earliest molecular clouds to the complex biological machinery of your cells, all while maintaining their fundamental isolation from every other particle in the universe. The carbon atom in your DNA that carries part of the genetic code for your eye colour was once part of a carbon dioxide molecule in the atmosphere of ancient Earth. Before that, it might have been part of the carbon core of a massive star that exploded billions of years ago. Before that, it was part of the primordial gas clouds that formed when the universe was young and hot and filled with the first generation of stars. Throughout this vast cosmic journey, spanning billions of years and countless transformations, this atom has never once touched any other atom. It has influenced them, been influenced by them, formed temporary associations with them through chemical bonds that are themselves made of electromagnetic forces operating across empty space. But it has never achieved true contact, never broken through the barrier of electromagnetic repulsion that keeps all matter forever apart. This cosmic perspective on atomic loneliness reveals something profound about the nature of identity and persistence. The atoms that make up your body today are not the same atoms that made up your body 7 years ago. Through the processes of metabolism, growth, and cellular replacement, you've been gradually rebuilt from entirely different matter. The atoms that once formed your heart muscle have been replaced. The atoms that once formed your brain cells have been recycled. The atoms that once formed your bones have been renewed. Yet somehow, through all of this atomic replacement, you remain recognizably yourself. What persists is not the matter itself, but the pattern, the information, the complex arrangement of electromagnetic relationships that creates the temporary structure we call your body. You are not a thing made of atoms, but a process, a dynamic pattern of interactions, a temporary organization of electromagnetic forces that maintains its form while the underlying particles flow through it like water through a riverbed. The loneliness of atoms becomes irrelevant to your identity, because your identity transcends the atoms themselves. You are the pattern of relationships between particles that never touch, the information structure that emerges from electromagnetic interactions across empty space, the process that gives meaning to matter without being reducible to matter itself. This understanding transforms our conception of what it means to be a physical being in a physical universe. We are not solid objects bumping against other solid objects in a mechanical universe of direct contact and simple causation. We are dynamic patterns of electromagnetic relationship, temporary organizations of forces and fields that create the appearance of substance while remaining fundamentally composed of emptiness and interaction. Our bodies are not collections of touching particles, but symphonies of repulsion, dances of electromagnetic influence, poems written in the language of quantum field theory and performed on the stage of space-time itself. The loneliness of matter thus becomes not a tragedy, but a fundamental feature that makes complexity, consciousness, and meaning possible. Without the electromagnetic barriers that keep atoms apart, there could be no stable structures, no chemistry, no biology, no evolution, no consciousness, no love, no art, no science, no philosophy, no wonder about the nature of existence itself. The cosmic solitude built into the architecture of reality is the very foundation upon which all higher forms of organization and meaning are constructed. When we understand this, the fact that we have never truly touched anything becomes not a limitation but a miracle. The sensations we experience as touch represent one of the most sophisticated translation processes in the known universe, converting electromagnetic field interactions into conscious experience, transforming atomic-level repulsion into human-level connection, bridging the gap between the loneliness of matter and the intimacy of awareness. Every touch becomes a testament to the remarkable ability of consciousness to create meaning and connection in a universe built upon separation and isolation. Moving from the tragic solitude of atomic reality into the realm of imagination, we find that science fiction has long been fascinated with worlds where the impossibility of true touch becomes not just a physical reality, but a central theme of human experience. These imagined futures often take the electromagnetic barriers that separate all matter and make them visible, visceral, and emotionally devastating in ways that our everyday experience usually conceals. In many science fiction narratives, advanced civilizations develop technology that makes the fundamental separateness of matter impossible to ignore. Imagine a world where everyone wears devices that can detect and display the electromagnetic fields surrounding their bodies, making visible the invisible barriers that prevent true contact. In such a world, lovers reaching for each other would see their electromagnetic auras touching while their flesh remains forever apart, creating a visual representation of the cosmic loneliness that underlies all physical interaction. The romance of touch would be replaced by the melancholy beauty of electromagnetic communion, intimate but forever incomplete. Other imagined futures explore worlds where genetic engineering or technological augmentation has enhanced human sensory capabilities to the point where people can directly perceive the quantum mechanical nature of reality. In these stories, characters experience the world as we might experience it. If we could see and feel the probability clouds of electron orbitals, if we could sense the virtual photons being exchanged between atoms, if we could perceive the vast emptiness that makes up the internal structure of matter. Touch, in such worlds, becomes a complex synesthetic experience where physical contact is accompanied by direct awareness of the electromagnetic forces creating the sensation, making every interaction simultaneously intimate and alienating. Some science fiction explores the psychological implications of technologies that allow people to merge their electromagnetic fields in ways that approach true contact without achieving it. Characters in these stories might use devices that synchronize their bioelectric fields, creating experiences of intimacy that transcend anything possible through conventional touch, while remaining fundamentally limited by the laws of physics that prohibit actual contact between atoms. The result is often portrayed as both transcendent and tragic, offering new forms of connection while highlighting the ultimate impossibility of complete unity between separate beings. The loneliness inherent in electromagnetic interaction becomes a central theme in stories about artificial intelligences that exist as pure information, electromagnetic patterns in computer networks that can interact with each other and with humans, but can never achieve physical contact in any form. These digital beings often long for physical embodiment, while simultaneously recognizing that even physical bodies cannot provide true touch, only more sophisticated forms of electromagnetic interaction. Their isolation becomes a metaphor for the fundamental separateness that characterizes all consciousness, whether biological or artificial. In some imagined futures, humanity discovers technologies that can manipulate the electromagnetic forces between atoms, allowing for new forms of interaction that approach but never achieve true contact. Characters might use electromagnetic field manipulators to create touch sensations without physical proximity, sharing tactile experiences across vast distances through synchronized field interactions. While these technologies offer new possibilities for intimacy and connection, they also serve to highlight the fact that all touch, whether local or remote, conventional or technologically mediated, remains fundamentally based on electromagnetic forces operating across unbridgeable gaps. Science fiction has also explored worlds where the discovery of the true nature of atomic interaction has profound cultural and psychological effects on human society. In these stories, the revelation that touch is impossible leads to new forms of art, philosophy, and spirituality that embrace rather than deny the fundamental separateness of matter. Characters develop elaborate rituals around the appreciation of electromagnetic interaction, creating new forms of beauty and meaning from the scientific understanding of atomic-level forces. Touch becomes not a disappointment but a celebration of the sophisticated illusions that consciousness can create from purely physical interactions. Some narratives imagine technologies that can briefly overcome the electromagnetic barriers between atoms, allowing for moments of true contact that are both transcendent and dangerous. Characters in these stories might use quantum field manipulators to temporarily suppress the electromagnetic forces that keep atoms apart, creating brief moments where matter can actually touch matter. These experiences are often portrayed as overwhelmingly intense, potentially destructive, and always temporary, highlighting the essential role that atomic separation plays in maintaining the stability of matter and consciousness. The genre has also explored the implications of discovering alien species that experience touch differently than humans do. These aliens might have evolved sensory systems that are more directly attuned to electromagnetic fields, experiencing what we call touch as we might experience vision or hearing. Their interactions with humans become exercises in translation between different ways of interpreting electromagnetic phenomena, creating opportunities to explore how much of our experience of physical reality is shaped by the particular characteristics of human nervous systems. In some science fiction futures, advanced civilizations use their understanding of electromagnetic interaction to create new forms of architecture and environmental design that take into account the true nature of atomic contact. Buildings might be designed to optimize electromagnetic field interactions, creating spaces where the illusion of touch is enhanced through careful manipulation of field geometries. Gardens might feature plants whose electromagnetic signatures create particular sensory experiences for visitors, transforming landscape design into a form of electromagnetic sculpture. The theme of untouchable consciousness appears frequently in stories about mind uploading and digital immortality. Characters who have transferred their consciousness into computer systems find themselves longing for physical sensation while recognizing that even their former biological bodies provided only the illusion of touch. Their digital existence becomes a meditation on the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical reality, exploring whether awareness itself might be as fundamentally untouchable as the atoms from which it emerges. Some narratives explore the development of new technologies that can directly interface with the quantum mechanical processes underlying electromagnetic interaction. Characters might use quantum field readers that can detect and interpret the virtual photon exchanges between atoms, providing direct access to the information content of touch without requiring physical contact. These technologies offer new forms of intimacy while highlighting the extent to which touch has always been about information transfer rather than direct physical connection. Science fiction has also imagined worlds where the understanding of atomic separateness leads to new forms of meditation and spiritual practice. Characters in these stories develop contemplative techniques based on awareness of electromagnetic interaction, using their understanding of atomic-level forces as a foundation for exploring consciousness and identity. The loneliness of matter becomes a starting point for investigating the nature of awareness and its relationship to physical reality. In these imagined futures, the prohibition against touch often extends beyond the physical to encompass emotional and psychological forms of contact as well. Characters might live in societies where the understanding of atomic separateness has created cultural taboos against claiming true intimacy or complete understanding of another person. The fundamental isolation of matter becomes a metaphor for the irreducible privacy of consciousness, leading to social structures that honor the essential unknowability of other minds. Some science fiction explores the development of art forms based on electromagnetic field interaction. Characters create sculptures and installations that manipulate electromagnetic forces to produce tactile experiences without requiring physical contact. Musicians compose symphonies of electromagnetic interaction that can be felt rather than heard. Poets write verses that must be experienced through electromagnetic sensation rather than visual or auditory perception. These art forms celebrate the sophisticated illusions that consciousness creates from atomic-level forces while acknowledging the fundamental separateness underlying all interaction. The theme of technological enhancement often appears in stories about devices that can amplify or modify the electromagnetic interactions that create touch sensations. Characters might use neural implants that can detect and amplify the subtle electromagnetic signals exchanged during human contact, creating experiences of heightened intimacy that remain bounded by the fundamental limits of atomic interaction. These technologies offer enhanced connection while serving as constant reminders of the barriers that can never be fully overcome. In some imagined futures, humanity encounters forms of matter or energy that operate according to different physical principles, offering the possibility of true contact for the first time in cosmic history. These encounters often serve as thought experiments about what direct contact might mean and whether it would be as meaningful as the electromagnetic interactions that have shaped all previous experience. Characters must grapple with the question of whether true touch would represent the ultimate fulfillment of human longing, or simply a different form of interaction with its own limitations and possibilities. The loneliness of electromagnetic interaction becomes particularly poignant in stories about the last human, isolated in a universe where all other consciousness has disappeared. Such characters must confront the full implications of atomic separateness without the social illusions that usually make isolation bearable. Their relationship with inanimate matter becomes a meditation on the nature of consciousness and its need for connection, even when that connection can only be achieved through electromagnetic forces operating across unbridgeable distances. Science fiction has also explored the implications of discovering that consciousness itself might operate through electromagnetic or quantum mechanical processes that prohibit direct contact between minds. Characters in these stories find that mental telepathy, if it were possible, would still involve information transfer across gaps rather than true mental contact. The isolation of consciousness mirrors the isolation of matter, creating layered loneliness that spans from the atomic to the psychological levels of reality. These fictional explorations serve to illuminate the emotional and philosophical implications of scientific understanding about the nature of touch and contact. By imagining worlds where the electromagnetic barriers between atoms become visible, visceral, and emotionally significant, science fiction helps us grapple with the meaning of scientific discoveries that might otherwise remain abstract. The loneliness of matter becomes not just a physical fact, but a starting point for exploring the nature of consciousness, identity, connection, and meaning in a universe built upon fundamental separateness. When we turn our attention from fictional futures to present-day reality, we must confront the profound question of what intimacy can mean when we understand that flesh never truly meets flesh. This understanding challenges some of our most basic assumptions about human connection, physical love, and the nature of comfort and solace that we derive from touch. Yet rather than diminishing the meaning of intimate contact, this scientific perspective can deepen our appreciation for the remarkable processes that create our experience of closeness and connection. Physical intimacy between human beings represents one of the most sophisticated forms of electromagnetic interaction in the known universe. When two people embrace, their bodies create complex patterns of field interaction that extend far beyond the apparent surfaces of contact. The electromagnetic fields generated by the trillions of atoms in each person's skin create interference patterns, resonances, and feedback loops that would challenge even our most advanced supercomputers to model completely. The sensation of warmth, pressure, texture, and closeness that emerges from these interactions represents a triumph of evolutionary engineering, transforming the repulsive forces between atoms into experiences of attraction, comfort, and love. Consider what happens during a simple kiss from the perspective of electromagnetic field theory. The atoms in one person's lips approach the atoms in another person's lips until their electron clouds begin to overlap in complex quantum mechanical ways. Virtual photons carry momentum and energy between the electromagnetic fields of both sets of atoms, creating the sensation of contact while maintaining absolute separation at the atomic level. The warmth perceived comes from increased molecular motion as thermal energy transfers through electromagnetic interaction. The softness felt emerges from the particular electromagnetic signature created by the molecular structure of lip tissue. The emotional significance of the kiss exists entirely in the neural processing that interprets these electromagnetic interactions as meaningful human connection. But the electromagnetic aspects of intimate touch extend far beyond the simple mechanics of repulsion and thermal transfer. Human skin contains an elaborate array of sensory receptors that respond to different aspects of electromagnetic interaction. Mechanoreceptors detect the minute deformations caused by electromagnetic pressure between atoms. Thermoreceptors respond to changes in electromagnetic energy transfer that we experience as temperature. Nociceptors can be activated by electromagnetic interactions intense enough to potentially damage tissue. All of these receptor types contribute information to neural networks that process electromagnetic input in ways that create rich, complex, emotionally resonant experiences of touch. The nervous system's interpretation of electromagnetic interaction becomes particularly sophisticated in areas of the body with high concentrations of sensory receptors. The fingertips, lips, and genital regions contain dense networks of neurons capable of detecting incredibly subtle variations in electromagnetic field interaction. These areas can distinguish between different materials, textures, temperatures, and pressures through their response to electromagnetic signatures. The result is a form of intimate touching that provides detailed information about the person being touched, while creating powerful emotional and physical responses in both participants. Human sexual response represents perhaps the most complex example of electromagnetic interaction being translated into profound psychological and physiological experience. The touch sensations that contribute to sexual arousal emerge entirely from electromagnetic forces operating across atomic scale gaps, yet they trigger cascades of neural activity that affect heart rate, breathing, hormone release, muscle tension, and consciousness itself. The electromagnetic interactions between skin surfaces create feedback loops with the nervous system that can lead to altered states of awareness, intense emotional bonding, and experiences that participants often describe as transcendent or spiritual. The role of electromagnetic interaction in creating emotional bonding through touch involves complex neurochemical processes that have been shaped by millions of years of evolution. When electromagnetic forces between atoms create the sensation we interpret as gentle, caring touch, the nervous system responds by releasing hormones like oxytocin and endorphins that promote feelings of attachment, trust, and well-being. These chemical responses serve important evolutionary functions, promoting pair bonding, parental care, and social cooperation, but they emerge entirely from the sophisticated interpretation of electromagnetic field interactions by neural networks. Intimate touch also involves electromagnetic interactions that operate below the threshold of conscious awareness, but still affect nervous system function. The bioelectric fields generated by muscle contractions, nerve impulses, and cellular metabolism create subtle electromagnetic signatures that can be detected by specialized sensory receptors. Some researchers suggest that human beings can unconsciously detect and respond to the electromagnetic fields generated by other people's biological processes, contributing to the sense of comfort, compatibility, or unease that sometimes accompanies physical proximity. The skin itself functions as a complex electromagnetic interface, with different layers responding to different aspects of field interaction. The outermost layer of dead skin cells creates characteristic patterns of electromagnetic resistance that contribute to tactile sensation. The living layers beneath contain nerve endings, blood vessels, and cellular structures that respond to electromagnetic stimulation in ways that affect both local sensation and whole-body physiology. Sweat, oils, and other secretions modify the electromagnetic properties of skin surfaces, creating chemical and electrical signatures that contribute to the complex sensory experience of intimate touch. Temperature plays a crucial role in intimate electromagnetic interaction, with thermal energy transfer between bodies creating sensations that are interpreted as comfort, arousal, or emotional warmth. The electromagnetic interactions that govern heat transfer between skin surfaces create temperature gradients that activate specialized receptors and trigger physiological responses ranging from vasodilation to shivering. The sensation of body heat during intimate contact emerges from electromagnetic energy transfer processes that operate according to the same physical principles that govern heat transfer between any warm objects, yet our nervous systems interpret these interactions as profoundly meaningful indicators of life, health, and emotional connection. The rhythm and pressure of intimate touch create temporal patterns of electromagnetic interaction that the nervous system processes in sophisticated ways. Gentle, repetitive touching creates rhythmic patterns of electromagnetic stimulation that can synchronize with biological rhythms like heartbeat and breathing, potentially leading to physiological coordination between partners. The pressure applied during touch determines the intensity of electromagnetic interaction, with light touching creating subtle field interactions that activate different neural pathways than the more intense interactions involved in firm pressure or massage. Intimate touch also involves electromagnetic interactions between areas of the body that are not directly in contact. The bioelectric fields generated by two people in close proximity can interact in ways that affect autonomous nervous system function, potentially leading to synchronization of heart rates, breathing patterns, and even brainwave activity. While these effects are subtle and not always consciously perceived, they may contribute to the sense of physiological and emotional connection that accompanies intimate physical contact. The cultural and personal meanings attributed to intimate touch emerge from the complex interplay between electromagnetic interaction and neural processing, shaped by learning, memory, and social conditioning. The The same pattern of electromagnetic field interaction can be interpreted as comforting, arousing, threatening, or meaningless, depending on the context, relationship, and personal history of the individuals involved. This highlights the extent to which the meaning of touch exists not in the electromagnetic interactions themselves, but in the sophisticated neural processes that interpret these interactions and integrate them with emotional, social, and cognitive information. Understanding intimate touch as electromagnetic interaction rather than direct physical contact can actually enhance rather than diminish its meaning and significance. The realization that our most profound experiences of human connection emerge from the sophisticated translation of atomic-level forces into conscious experience reveals the remarkable nature of both consciousness and human intimacy. Every caress becomes a testament to the brain's ability to create meaning from electromagnetic information. Every embrace becomes evidence of evolution's capacity to transform the repulsive forces between atoms into experiences of attraction and love. The fact that intimate partners never actually touch in the literal sense makes the experience of connection and intimacy more rather than less remarkable. Two separate beings, each composed of atoms that maintain absolute isolation from each other, somehow manage to create shared experiences of pleasure, comfort, and emotional bonding through the sophisticated interpretation of electromagnetic interactions. The barriers that keep matter forever apart become the medium through which consciousness creates some of its most meaningful experiences. This perspective also illuminates the profound vulnerability involved in intimate touch. When we allow another person close enough for complex electromagnetic interaction, we are sharing information about our body's electromagnetic signature, our temperature, our muscle tension, our autonomic nervous system activity. The electromagnetic fields generated by our biological processes become temporarily intermingled with theirs, creating shared patterns of interaction that exist nowhere else in the universe. While we never literally touch, we create together temporary configurations of electromagnetic interaction that are as unique and unrepeatable as fingerprints. The loneliness of matter thus becomes not an obstacle to intimacy, but the very foundation that makes intimacy possible. Because atoms cannot touch, consciousness must interpret electromagnetic interactions as touch, creating in the process rich, complex, emotionally resonant experiences that transcend the simple mechanics of field interaction. The gap between bodies becomes a space that consciousness fills with meaning, transforming electromagnetic repulsion into emotional connection, atomic isolation into human intimacy. As we delve deeper into the relationship between consciousness and the physical world, we encounter one of the most profound and unsettling questions in all of science and philosophy. Is consciousness itself somehow untouchable by the physical processes of the brain and body? This question strikes at the heart of one of the greatest mysteries of existence, the relationship between mind and matter, between subjective experience and objective reality, between the felt sense of being conscious and the electromagnetic processes that occur within neural tissue. When we consider consciousness from the perspective of atomic-level reality, the mystery becomes even more intriguing. The thoughts you're having right now as you process these words, the sense of understanding that emerges as you follow the logical progression of ideas, the feeling of curiosity or wonder that might accompany these reflections, all of these mental phenomena are somehow associated with patterns of electromagnetic activity in your brain. Yet the relationship between these electromagnetic processes and your subjective experience remains one of the deepest puzzles in science. The neurons in your brain communicate through electrochemical signals that operate according to the same electromagnetic principles that govern all atomic interactions. When you form a memory, specific patterns of electromagnetic activity create lasting changes in the configuration of neural networks. When you recall that memory, electromagnetic impulses recreate similar patterns of neural activation. When you make a decision, electromagnetic processes in your frontal cortex coordinate activity across multiple brain regions. Yet somehow, from all of this purely physical activity, the rich inner world of conscious experience emerges. The puzzle becomes even more mysterious when we consider that the electromagnetic interactions occurring in your brain right now are fundamentally no different from the electromagnetic interactions occurring in any other complex system. the virtual photons being exchanged between the atoms in your neurons operate according to the same physical principles as the virtual photons being exchanged between the atoms in your computer, your coffee cup, or the surface of a distant star. The electrons flowing through the synaptic connections in your brain follow the same quantum mechanical laws as the electrons flowing through the circuits of an electronic device. Yet somehow, the electromagnetic activity in your brain is associated with the felt experience of being you, while the electromagnetic activity in other systems appears to occur without any accompanying inner life. This raises the profound question of whether consciousness might exist in some realm that is fundamentally untouchable by the physical processes with which it appears to be associated. The electromagnetic activity in your brain can be measured, recorded, and analysed, but the conscious experience that accompanies this activity remains invisible to scientific instruments. We can detect the neural correlates of consciousness, the patterns of brain activity that occur when you report having particular experiences, but we cannot directly observe the experiences themselves. Consciousness remains stubbornly private, accessible only to the being who experiences it, untouchable by the objective methods of science. Consider the simple experience of seeing the colour red. When red light strikes your retina, it triggers specific patterns of electromagnetic activity in photoreceptor cells. These cells send electromagnetic signals to other neurons in your visual system, which process the information and send further electromagnetic signals to your brain. Eventually, complex patterns of electromagnetic activity occur in your visual cortex that correlate with your reported experience of seeing red. But the actual experience of redness, the qualitative feeling of what red looks like to you, remains completely inaccessible to external observation. No instrument can measure the redness of your experience. No electromagnetic detector can capture the felt quality of your perception. This explanatory gap between objective electromagnetic processes and subjective conscious experience has puzzled philosophers and scientists for centuries. The electromagnetic activity in your brain when you see red is publicly observable, measurable, and subject to the same physical laws that govern all electromagnetic phenomena. But the experience of redness itself seems to exist in a different category of reality altogether, untouchable by physical measurement, inaccessible to objective investigation, knowable only through the private first-person perspective of consciousness itself. The untouchable nature of consciousness becomes even more mysterious when we consider that conscious experience seems to have causal power in the physical world. Your thoughts can lead to decisions that result in physical actions. Your intentions can guide the movement of your body through space. Your emotions can trigger physiological changes that affect your health and behavior. Yet if consciousness exists in some realm that is untouchable by physical processes, how can it influence the electromagnetic activity in your brain and body? How can something that is not physical cause changes in physical systems? This mind-body problem, as philosophers call it, becomes particularly acute when viewed from the perspective of atomic-level reality. Every movement of your body, every word you speak, every action you take, emerges from specific patterns of electromagnetic activity in your nervous system. The decision to lift your hand right now would involve cascades of electromagnetic signals traveling from your brain to the motor neurons that control your arm muscles. These electromagnetic processes follow the deterministic laws of physics, operating through the same virtual photon exchanges that govern all atomic interactions. Yet the conscious intention to lift your hand seems to somehow influence these purely physical processes, directing electromagnetic activity in ways that serve your conscious purposes. The mystery deepens when we consider the unity of conscious experience in contrast to the distributed nature of brain activity. At any given moment, your conscious experience presents itself as a unified, coherent whole. You experience a single integrated awareness that seamlessly combines visual information, auditory input, tactile sensations, thoughts, emotions, and memories into one continuous stream of consciousness. Yet the electromagnetic activity in your brain is highly distributed, occurring simultaneously in billions of neurons scattered across numerous brain regions. There is no central location where all of this information comes together, no electromagnetic headquarters where the unified experience of consciousness could be generated. This binding problem, the question of how distributed electromagnetic processes give rise to unified conscious experience, suggests that consciousness might operate according to principles that transcend the simple summation of atomic-level interactions. The whole of conscious experience appears to be genuinely greater than the sum of its electromagnetic parts, exhibiting properties that cannot be reduced to or explained solely in terms of the physical processes from which it emerges. Consciousness seems to represent a form of organization or information processing that is, in some fundamental sense, untouchable by purely physical analysis. The temporal nature of consciousness adds another layer to this mystery. Your conscious experience unfolds as a continuous stream, with each moment of awareness flowing seamlessly into the next. You experience duration, temporal flow, the passage of time as a fundamental aspect of conscious existence. Yet the electromagnetic processes in your brain occur as discrete events, with individual neural firings lasting only milliseconds and synaptic transmissions occurring in precisely timed sequences. How does the discontinuous digital-like nature of neural electromagnetic activity give rise to the continuous analog-like flow of conscious experience? Recent research in neuroscience has revealed that consciousness appears to be associated with particular patterns of electromagnetic activity that exhibit properties not found in other neural processes. These patterns involve complex oscillations, synchronizations, and feedback loops that span multiple brain regions and timescales. Some researchers suggest that consciousness emerges from electromagnetic field effects that operate at scales larger than individual neurons, creating global patterns of brain activity that somehow give rise to unified conscious experience. Yet even these sophisticated electromagnetic theories of consciousness face the fundamental challenge of explaining how objective physical processes can give rise to subjective conscious experience. The patterns of electromagnetic activity associated with consciousness can be observed and measured, but the felt quality of conscious experience remains untouchable by objective investigation. The explanatory gap between electromagnetic processes and conscious awareness appears to represent a fundamental limitation in our ability to understand consciousness through purely physical methods. This limitation might reflect something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. Perhaps conscious experience represents a form of information processing that transcends the electromagnetic interactions from which it emerges. Perhaps consciousness involves quantum mechanical processes that operate according to different principles than classical electromagnetic theory. Perhaps consciousness is a fundamental feature of reality that cannot be reduced to or explained in terms of more basic physical processes. The possibility that consciousness might be untouchable by physical explanation has led some philosophers and scientists to consider radical alternatives to materialist theories of mind. These include theories that consciousness is a fundamental property of matter, present even at the atomic level and somehow amplified or organized by complex systems like brains. Other theories suggest that consciousness exists in some non-physical realm that interacts with, but is not reducible to electromagnetic processes in the brain. Still others propose that consciousness and matter are two aspects of some more fundamental reality that transcends both mental and physical categories. The untouchable nature of consciousness also raises profound questions about the relationship between individual minds and the physical world. If your conscious experience cannot be directly accessed by others, if your inner life remains forever private and subjective, then in what sense do we share a common reality? The electromagnetic interactions that govern the behavior of atoms and molecules operate according to universal physical laws, but the conscious experiences that emerge from these interactions appear to be irreducibly personal and private. Each conscious being exists in their own untouchable realm of subjective experience, forever separated from other minds by barriers that may be even more absolute than the electromagnetic forces that keep atoms apart. This privacy of consciousness creates a form of epistemological loneliness that parallels the physical loneliness of matter. Just as atoms can never truly touch despite their electromagnetic interactions, perhaps minds can never truly connect despite their shared physical reality. The thoughts and feelings that constitute your inner life remain forever inaccessible to others, just as their inner lives remain forever inaccessible to you. We can share language, behavior, and even electromagnetic brain activity. But the felt quality of conscious experience appears to be untouchable across the boundaries between minds. Yet consciousness also exhibits properties that seem to transcend the limitations of purely physical systems. The contents of conscious experience can refer to abstract concepts, mathematical relationships, moral principles, and aesthetic values that have no direct physical correlates. You can think about infinity, contemplate justice, appreciate beauty, and love someone who is not physically present. These mental contents seem to exist in a realm of meaning and significance that is somehow both connected to and independent of the electromagnetic processes in your brain. The creative and imaginative capacities of consciousness also suggest that mind might possess properties that are untouchable by purely physical explanation. When you imagine a scene that has never existed, compose a piece of music, or solve a mathematical problem, you appear to be accessing possibilities that transcend the immediate physical circumstances of your brain and environment. Consciousness seems capable of exploring logical and imaginative spaces that extend far beyond the electromagnetic interactions from which it emerges. The relationship between consciousness and time presents another puzzle that suggests mind might be untouchable by conventional physical analysis. While electromagnetic processes in the brain occur in real time according to the laws of physics, conscious experience can transcend temporal limitations in remarkable ways. Memory allows consciousness to access past events as though they were present. Imagination enables consciousness to explore possible futures. Meditation and other contemplative practices can create experiences of timelessness that seem to exist outside the normal flow of temporal experience. These temporal transcendence capabilities of consciousness suggest that mind might operate according to principles that are fundamentally different from those that govern electromagnetic processes in the brain. While brain activity is constrained by the speed of light, the conservation of energy, and other physical limitations, conscious experience seems capable of instantaneous access to memories, immediate recognition of complex patterns, and simultaneous awareness of multiple levels of meaning and significance. The moral and ethical dimensions of consciousness also suggest that mind might touch realms of value and meaning that transcend purely physical reality. Your capacity to experience guilt, empathy, moral outrage, and ethical commitment involves conscious states that seem to be about something more than the electromagnetic processes in your brain. When you feel that something is right or wrong, beautiful or ugly, meaningful or trivial, you appear to be accessing standards of value that exist independently of the physical processes that enable these judgments. This normative dimension of consciousness points toward the possibility that mind participates in realms of meaning, value, and significance that are untouchable by purely physical investigation. The electromagnetic activity in your brain when you make a moral judgment can be observed and measured, but the moral truth or falsehood of the judgment itself exists in a logical space that appears to transcend physical reality. Consciousness seems to be the interface through which purely physical beings can access abstract realms of mathematics, logic, ethics, and aesthetics that have no direct physical existence. The mystery of consciousness thus represents perhaps the ultimate example of something that is untouchable by conventional scientific methods. While we can study the electromagnetic correlates of consciousness, map the neural networks that support conscious experience, and even manipulate brain activity to alter conscious states, the felt quality of conscious experience itself remains stubbornly private, subjective, and inaccessible to objective investigation. Consciousness appears to exist at the intersection of mind and matter, somehow emerging from electromagnetic processes while remaining untouchable by the very physical methods that can measure its neural correlates. This untouchable nature of consciousness does not necessarily mean that consciousness is supernatural or non-physical. It might simply reflect limitations in our current scientific methods and conceptual frameworks. Perhaps future developments in neuroscience, quantum mechanics, or information theory will provide new ways to understand the relationship between electromagnetic processes and conscious experience. Perhaps consciousness will eventually be understood as a sophisticated form of information processing that can be fully explained in terms of physical principles we have yet to discover. But it is also possible that the untouchable nature of consciousness reflects something fundamental about the relationship between subjective experience and objective reality. Perhaps consciousness represents a form of existence that cannot be reduced to or explained solely in terms of electromagnetic processes, even if it depends upon such processes for its expression in the physical world. Perhaps the explanatory gap between mind and matter reflects a genuine ontological distinction between different types of reality, rather than simply a limitation in our current understanding. The question of whether consciousness is ultimately touchable or untouchable by physical explanation remains one of the deepest mysteries in science and philosophy. But regardless of how this mystery is eventually resolved, the untouchable privacy of conscious experience will likely remain. Even if we develop complete theories of how electromagnetic processes give rise to consciousness, your inner life will still be accessible only to you. The felt quality of your experience, the what it is like-ness of being you, will remain forever private and subjective, untouchable by others despite our shared physical reality. This recognition of the untouchable nature of consciousness can lead to both humility and wonder. Humility because it reminds us of the limits of objective knowledge and the irreducible mystery of subjective experience. Wonder because it reveals that in the midst of a universe built upon electromagnetic interactions between atoms that never touch, consciousness somehow emerges as a form of existence that transcends while depending upon the physical processes from which it arises. In the realm of mind, the loneliness of matter is somehow overcome, not through direct contact, but through the creation of an inner world of experience that is richer, more complex, and more meaningful than the sum of its electromagnetic parts. Despite all of this scientific understanding about the impossibility of true physical contact, about the electromagnetic barriers that separate all matter, about the untouchable privacy of consciousness itself, there remains something profoundly beautiful and necessary about the illusion of touch. This illusion is not a mere deception or a failure of perception, but rather one of the most sophisticated and meaningful creations in the known universe, a gift that emerges from the complex interplay between the fundamental forces of physics and the remarkable information processing capabilities of living systems. The illusion of touch serves as a bridge between the lonely reality of atomic separation and the human need for connection, comfort, and meaning. Through this illusion, electromagnetic field interactions become transformed into experiences of warmth, tenderness, pleasure, and love. The repulsive forces that keep atoms forever apart become the foundation for some of the most profound and meaningful experiences possible for conscious beings. In creating the experience of touch from electromagnetic interaction, evolution has performed a kind of magic, transforming the fundamental loneliness of matter into the possibility of intimacy and connection. This transformation represents one of the most remarkable achievements of biological evolution. Over millions of years, natural selection has shaped nervous systems that can interpret electromagnetic field interactions in ways that promote survival, reproduction, and the formation of social bonds. The sensory receptors in human skin can detect electromagnetic interactions so subtle that they can distinguish between surfaces that differ in their molecular structure by only tiny amounts. The neural networks that process this information have evolved to extract meaning, emotion, and behavioral guidance from patterns of electromagnetic activity that would be undetectable to most scientific instruments. The sophistication of this illusion becomes apparent when we consider the vast range of tactile experiences that emerge from the relatively simple process of electromagnetic repulsion between atoms. The sensation of silk differs from the sensation of cotton, not because of any fundamental difference in the electromagnetic forces involved, but because of subtle variations in how the molecular structure of each material creates characteristic patterns of field interaction. The nervous system has learned to recognize these patterns and associate them with different qualities of texture, creating rich sensory experiences from tiny differences in electromagnetic signature. Similarly, the experience of temperature emerges from the nervous system's interpretation of electromagnetic energy transfer rates. When you touch something warm, you're not directly sensing heat, but rather the increased rate of electromagnetic interaction between the atoms in your skin and the atoms in the warm object. The sensation of warmth is a neural interpretation of this increased energy transfer rate, translated into conscious experience through pathways that have been shaped by evolution to motivate behavior that supports survival and well-being. The illusion of touch also creates the possibility for emotional and psychological experiences that transcend the simple mechanics of electromagnetic interaction. The comfort provided by a mother's embrace, the pleasure of intimate contact between lovers, the soothing effect of a gentle massage, all of these experiences emerge from the nervous system's interpretation of electromagnetic forces as meaningful human connection. The brain does not simply detect electromagnetic interactions, it imbues them with emotional significance, social meaning, and personal relevance. This emotional dimension of touch involves complex neurochemical processes that have been shaped by evolution to promote behaviors that enhance survival and reproduction. When electromagnetic interactions are interpreted as gentle, caring touch, the nervous system releases hormones like oxytocin that promote bonding, trust, and social cooperation. When electromagnetic interactions are interpreted as painful or threatening, the nervous system releases stress hormones that motivate protective behaviors. The same fundamental physical forces that keep atoms apart become the foundation for a rich emotional vocabulary that helps guide behavior and maintain social relationships. The illusion of touch also serves crucial developmental functions, particularly in early childhood, when the nervous system is still forming its understanding of the world. Infants learn about the properties of objects, the boundaries of their own bodies, and the nature of social relationships through tactile exploration. The electromagnetic interactions between an infant's skin and various surfaces provide information that helps shape neural development, motor learning, and emotional regulation. Without the illusion of touch, human development would be profoundly impaired, as so much of early learning depends upon tactile feedback from electromagnetic interactions with the environment. The social functions of touch illusion extend throughout human life, serving as a primary means of communication, comfort, and bonding. Human beings use patterns of electromagnetic interaction to convey complex social and emotional information that would be difficult to express through language alone. A gentle hand on the shoulder can communicate support and understanding. A firm handshake can convey confidence and respect. An embrace can express love, comfort, or celebration. These social uses of touch rely entirely on the nervous system's ability to interpret electromagnetic interactions as meaningful communication, transforming atomic-level forces into human-level connection. The illusion of touch also plays crucial roles in human creativity and aesthetic experience. Musicians depend upon tactile feedback from their instruments to control the nuances of their performance. Visual artists rely on the feel of brushes, pencils, and other tools to translate their creative intentions into the physical form. Craftspeople use their sense of touch to assess the quality of materials and the progress of their work. All of these creative activities depend upon the sophisticated translation of electromagnetic interactions into meaningful sensory information. The therapeutic applications of touch further demonstrate the profound importance of this illusion for human well-being. Massage therapy works by creating patterns of electromagnetic interaction that the nervous system interprets as relaxing and healing. Physical therapy uses controlled electromagnetic interactions to promote healing and restore function. Even simple human contact can have measurable effects on immune function, stress hormone levels, and overall health. These healing effects emerge entirely from the nervous system's interpretation of electromagnetic forces as beneficial rather than harmful. The illusion of touch also serves important roles in human safety and survival. The ability to feel pain when electromagnetic interactions become intense enough to potentially damage tissue provides crucial feedback that helps prevent injury. The capacity to sense texture, temperature, and pressure through electromagnetic interaction allows humans to navigate their environment safely and effectively. The sensation of balance and proprioception that helps coordinate movement depends partly on tactile feedback from electromagnetic interactions between the body and external surfaces. In the realm of human sexuality and intimate relationships, the illusion of touch becomes perhaps most profound and meaningful. The electromagnetic interactions involved in sexual contact trigger complex neurochemical cascades that can lead to intense pleasure, emotional bonding, and altered states of consciousness. The nervous system's interpretation of these interactions as pleasurable serves important evolutionary functions related to reproduction and pair bonding, but it also creates possibilities for transcendent experiences that seem to go far beyond simple biological necessity. The psychological comfort provided by the illusion of touch cannot be overstated. In times of distress, grief or fear, the electromagnetic interactions involved in comforting touch can activate neural pathways that reduce stress, promote calm, and restore emotional equilibrium. The simple act of holding hands with someone you care about creates patterns of electromagnetic interaction that the nervous system interprets as safety, connection, and love. These experiences provide crucial psychological resources that help humans cope with the challenges and uncertainties of existence. The illusion of touch also contributes to human identity and self-awareness in important ways. The boundaries of the self are partly defined by tactile feedback from electromagnetic interactions between the body and the environment. The sense of embodiment, of being located in and identified with a particular physical form, depends heavily on tactile information that emerges from electromagnetic forces. Without this illusion, human consciousness might lack the grounding and physical reality that seems so central to our sense of who and what we are. Cultural and social meanings attributed to touch vary widely across human societies, but all cultures recognize the profound significance of the electromagnetic interactions interpreted as human contact. Ritual uses of touch, social customs governing appropriate contact, and ceremonial significance attributed to tactile interaction all demonstrate the universal human recognition that the illusion of touch carries meaning far beyond its physical basis in electromagnetic forces. The fact that this rich, complex, emotionally resonant experience of touch emerges entirely from electromagnetic interactions between atoms that never actually contact each other reveals something profound about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical reality. The illusion of touch demonstrates that consciousness is not simply a passive observer of physical processes, but an active interpreter that can create meaning, beauty, and significance from the raw material of electromagnetic forces. In transforming atomic-level repulsion into human-level connection, consciousness reveals its remarkable capacity to transcend while remaining grounded in the physical processes from which it emerges. The gift of touch illusion becomes even more precious when we understand its true nature. Knowing that every caress is really a sophisticated interpretation of electromagnetic field interactions does not diminish the comfort it provides, but rather enhances our appreciation for the remarkable processes that create human experience. Understanding that every embrace involves atoms that maintain absolute separation, while creating the sensation of contact, reveals the profound creativity of consciousness in generating meaning from the fundamental forces of physics. This illusion keeps us alive not just in the biological sense of helping us navigate our environment and maintain social bonds, but in the existential sense of providing experiences of connection, meaning, and beauty that make existence worthwhile. In a universe built upon the fundamental loneliness of matter, where atoms exist in cosmic isolation and consciousness remains forever private and subjective, the illusion of touch creates moments of apparent contact, intimacy, and connection that transcend the barriers that separate all things from all other things. The illusion of touch connects us not only to other people but to the world itself. Through tactile experience, we feel ourselves to be part of the physical reality that surrounds us rather than isolated observers of it. The electromagnetic interactions between our bodies and the environment create sensations of texture, temperature, weight, and resistance that ground our consciousness in the material world. These sensations provide a sense of reality, substance, and presence that purely abstract thought cannot achieve. Finally, the illusion of touch comforts us by providing tangible evidence of our own existence and agency in the world. When we touch objects and feel their resistance to our electromagnetic fields, we experience confirmation that we are real, physical beings capable of interacting with and influencing our environment. When others touch us and we feel their electromagnetic presence, we receive confirmation that we exist in a shared reality populated by other conscious beings. These basic reassurances, emerging from electromagnetic interactions between atoms that never touch, provide the foundation for self-confidence, social connection, and the courage to engage with existence itself. The illusion of touch is indeed a gift, one of the most precious and essential gifts in the entire cosmos. It transforms the tragic loneliness built into the structure of matter into the possibility of comfort, connection, and love. It bridges the gap between electromagnetic forces and conscious experience, creating meaning from physics and emotion from energy. It allows conscious beings to feel connected to each other and to the world despite the fundamental separateness that characterizes all matter at the atomic level. In recognizing touch as illusion, we do not lose its power to comfort and connect us. Instead, we gain a deeper appreciation for the remarkable processes that create human experience and for the gift of consciousness that can transform electromagnetic repulsion into experiences of attraction, warmth, and love. The illusion of touch reveals that some of the most beautiful and meaningful aspects of existence emerge not from direct contact between things, but from the sophisticated interpretation of forces and fields by conscious awareness. In a universe where nothing ever truly touches anything else, consciousness creates the experience of connection, and in doing so demonstrates its profound capacity to generate meaning, beauty, and love from the fundamental loneliness of matter itself. As we continue to explore these profound questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and human connection, we find ourselves drawn deeper into mysteries that span from the quantum mechanical behavior of subatomic particles to the emergence of meaning and purpose in conscious experience. The story of touch, or rather the story of the absence of touch, reveals layers of complexity that extend far beyond the simple mechanics of electromagnetic repulsion between atoms. Consider for a moment the extraordinary journey that brought you to this very instant of reading these words. The carbon atoms that form the neurons processing this information were forged in the nuclear furnaces of ancient stars billions of years ago. When those stars exhausted their fuel and exploded in magnificent supernovae, they scattered these atoms across vast reaches of interstellar space. Over cosmic ages, gravitational forces drew this matter together into new stellar nurseries, then into planetary systems, and eventually into the complex chemistry that would give rise to life on Earth. Throughout this entire cosmic odyssey, spanning billions of years and countless transformations, these atoms maintained their fundamental isolation. They participated in stellar nuclear synthesis without touching the other atoms involved in the process. They drifted through the cold vacuum of space for millions of years without making contact with any other matter. They condensed into planetary formation through gravitational attraction that operated across empty space. They became incorporated into the first primitive life forms through chemical reactions based entirely on electromagnetic forces operating across atomic gaps. Even now, as these ancient stellar atoms form part of your brain and enable your consciousness to contemplate their own history, they remain as isolated as they were in the hearts of dying stars. The profound thoughts you're thinking about the nature of touch emerge from information processing systems built entirely from matter that has never touched any other matter. Your consciousness, pondering the impossibility of contact, is itself made possible by networks of neurons whose component atoms maintain absolute separation from each other. This cosmic perspective on the isolation of matter reveals something profound about the nature of information and pattern in the universe. While matter remains forever isolated, information can flow freely across the electromagnetic gaps that separate atoms. The pattern of neural activity that constitutes your current thoughts can influence the pattern of neural activity that will constitute your next thoughts, not through direct contact between atoms, but through the flow of information carried by electromagnetic fields. In this sense, consciousness represents a form of existence that transcends the limitations of matter while remaining dependent upon it. The electromagnetic patterns that create your thoughts right now are part of an unbroken chain of information flow that extends back to the earliest moments after the Big Bang. The quantum fluctuations in the primordial universe created patterns of matter and energy distribution that eventually led to the formation of the first atoms. These atoms carried information in their internal structure, in the arrangement of their electron orbitals, in their capacity to interact with other atoms through electromagnetic forces. This information was preserved and transmitted through billions of years of cosmic evolution, never requiring direct contact between particles, but always dependent upon the electromagnetic relationships between them. When the first complex molecules formed in the early solar system, they did so not through atoms touching each other, but through atoms sharing information about their electromagnetic states. The chemical bonds that held these molecules together were patterns of shared electromagnetic information, arrangements of electron orbitals that created stable configurations without requiring physical contact between the constituent atoms. These molecular information patterns became the foundation for increasingly complex chemical networks that eventually gave rise to the self-replicating systems we call life. The emergence of life represents a new form of information processing based on electromagnetic interactions between atoms that never touch. The DNA in your cells stores information in the sequence of molecular subunits, but this information storage and retrieval process depends entirely on electromagnetic interactions between molecules that maintain strict separation from each other. When your cells decode genetic information to synthesize proteins, they do so through elaborate molecular machinery that operates like a sophisticated computer, processing information through electromagnetic forces without any component ever making direct contact with any other component. Your immune system represents another remarkable example of information processing through electromagnetic interaction. When immune cells encounter foreign substances, they recognize them not through direct contact but through the electromagnetic signatures created by molecular surface patterns. The antibodies that protect you from disease work by binding to specific molecular targets through each electromagnetic forces that hold the antibody and target in precise geometric relationships without allowing their atoms to touch. Your body's ability to distinguish self from foreign, healthy from diseased, safe from dangerous, all depends upon information processing systems based on electromagnetic interactions across atomic gaps. The nervous system that creates your conscious experience represents the most sophisticated information processing system known to exist in the universe, and it operates entirely through electromagnetic interactions between atoms that never touch. When you form a memory, patterns of electromagnetic activity create lasting changes in the connections between neurons. When you recall that memory, electromagnetic signals recreate similar patterns of neural activation. When you learn something new, electromagnetic interactions between neurons modify the strength and configuration of synaptic connections, storing information in the pattern of relationships between cells whose atoms remain forever isolated from each other. The language you're using to understand these concepts exists as patterns of electromagnetic activity in your brain, patterns that were themselves learned through electromagnetic interactions with your environment. Every word you know, every concept you can think, every skill you have acquired exists as information stored in neural networks through electromagnetic relationships between atoms that have never touched. The meaning these words convey to you emerges from the activation of specific patterns of electromagnetic activity that your brain has learned to associate with particular concepts and experiences. Even your sense of personal identity, your feeling of being a continuous self existing through time, emerges from patterns of electromagnetic activity rather than from any fixed physical structure. The atoms that make up your body are constantly being replaced through metabolic processes, but the pattern of electromagnetic relationships that constitutes your identity persists through these changes. You remain recognizably yourself not because you're made of the same matter from year to year, but because the information patterns that define your consciousness maintain continuity through time despite the constant turnover of their physical substrate. This understanding reveals that you are not fundamentally a material being but an informational being, a pattern of electromagnetic relationships that maintains its coherence while the underlying matter flows through it like water through a riverbed. Your thoughts, memories, personality, and consciousness exist as dynamic patterns of information processing, rather than as static physical structures. The isolation of atoms becomes irrelevant to your identity because your identity transcends the atoms themselves, existing in the realm of pattern and relationship rather than in the realm of matter and contact. The same principle applies to all the relationships that give meaning to human existence. When you love someone, that love exists not in any physical substance, but in patterns of electromagnetic activity in your nervous system. These patterns were shaped by electromagnetic interactions with your environment and other people, but the love itself exists as information, as meaning, as a configuration of neural activity that creates emotional significance. The person you love exists for you primarily as patterns of information stored in your memory and reactivated by electromagnetic processes in your brain. Even when they are physically present, your experience of them emerges from your nervous system's electromagnetic interpretation of sensory input, rather than from any direct contact with their physical substance. The cultural and social structures that organize human society also exist primarily as shared patterns of information, rather than as physical entities. Laws, languages, customs, beliefs, and values exist as patterns of electromagnetic activity in the brains of the people who participate in them. These information patterns are transmitted from person to person, not through physical contact, but through electromagnetic signals, speech, writing, and other forms of communication that operate across the gaps that separate all matter. Human civilization itself exists as a vast network of information processing and transmission, creating complex patterns of meaning and organization without requiring direct contact between the atoms that make up the individual participants. Even art, music, literature, and other forms of creative expression exist primarily as information patterns rather than as physical objects. A painting is meaningful not because of the physical pigments on the canvas, but because of the information these pigments convey to nervous systems capable of interpreting visual patterns. Music exists not in the physical vibrations of air molecules, but in the patterns of information these vibrations carry to auditory processing systems. Literature exists not in the physical marks on paper, but in the linguistic information these marks represent and the meanings this information creates in the minds of readers. The beauty you perceive in a sunset, the emotional impact of a piece of music, the intellectual satisfaction of understanding a mathematical proof. All of these meaningful experiences emerge from patterns of electromagnetic activity in your nervous system, interpreting information from your environment. These experiences exist in the realm of meaning and consciousness, rather than in the realm of physical contact and material interaction. The sunset does not touch your retina in any literal sense. The music does not contact your eardrums. The mathematical symbols do not make physical connection with your visual cortex. Yet all of these create profound and meaningful experiences through the transmission and processing of information across electromagnetic gaps. This information-based understanding of human experience reveals that the most important aspects of existence, the elements that give life meaning and significance, transcend the limitations imposed by the isolation of matter. Love, beauty, truth, justice, creativity, and consciousness itself exist as patterns of information and relationship rather than as material substances. The fact that atoms never touch becomes irrelevant to these higher-order phenomena because they operate in the realm of pattern and meaning rather than in the realm of physical contact and material interaction. The emergence of meaning from matter through information processing represents one of the most remarkable features of the universe. Through the sophisticated interpretation of electromagnetic interactions, consciousness creates experiences of beauty, significance, and value that transcend the simple mechanics of atomic repulsion. The universe becomes not just a collection of isolated particles moving through empty space, but a vast information processing system capable of generating meaning, purpose, and subjective experience. This perspective transforms our understanding of loneliness and connection. While matter remains forever isolated, information can flow freely, creating networks of meaning and relationship that span from the quantum mechanical level to the cosmic scale. Your consciousness participates in these information networks every moment of your existence, connecting you to other minds, to the cultural heritage of humanity, to the physical processes that sustain life, and to the cosmic evolutionary processes that created the atoms from which you are made. The loneliness of matter thus becomes the foundation for a different kind of connection, one based on information sharing rather than physical contact. Through electromagnetic interactions that never involve direct touch, conscious beings can share thoughts, emotions, experiences, and meanings. They can create art, literature, music, and philosophy that communicate across the barriers that separate individual minds. They can participate in cultural traditions that connect them to past and future generations. They can contribute to the collective human understanding of reality and consciousness. In recognizing that touch is impossible, we do not lose the possibility of connection but discover new forms of relationship based on information, meaning, and shared consciousness. The electromagnetic interactions between atoms that never touch become the foundation for communication systems that can transmit complex ideas across vast distances and long periods of time. The books you read, the conversations you have, the art you appreciate, all represent forms of connection that transcend the physical limitations of matter while remaining dependent upon the electromagnetic forces that govern atomic behavior. This understanding also reveals the profound responsibility that comes with consciousness and the ability to process information. Every thought you think, every word you speak, every action you take creates patterns of information that can influence the thoughts and actions of others. These information patterns can persist long after the atoms that originally created them have been recycled into other forms. The ideas you contribute to human culture, the kindness you show to others, the knowledge you help create or preserve, all become part of the vast information network that constitutes human civilization. The legacy of every conscious being exists not in the matter that temporarily comprises their body, but in the information patterns they create and transmit during their lifetime. These patterns can influence other minds, inspire new thoughts and discoveries, comfort those who are suffering, and contribute to the ongoing evolution of consciousness and culture. In this sense, every individual participates in something much larger than their temporary material existence, contributing to information networks that span generations and connect all conscious beings. The recognition that everything you have ever experienced emerges from electromagnetic interactions between atoms that never touch does not diminish the reality or significance of your experiences, but rather reveals their truly remarkable nature. Every sensation, every thought, every emotion, every moment of conscious awareness represents a triumph of information, processing over the fundamental isolation of matter. Your consciousness creates meaning, beauty, and significance from the raw material of electromagnetic forces, transforming atomic-level repulsion into human-level experience. This transformation from electromagnetic interaction to conscious experience represents one of the most profound mysteries in all of science and philosophy. The fact that patterns of ionic currents flowing through neural networks can give rise to subjective experience, to the felt sense of being aware, to the rich inner life of consciousness, remains one of the deepest questions about the nature of reality. Yet this mysterious transformation happens continuously in your brain, creating the ongoing stream of conscious experience that constitutes your existence. The miracle of consciousness emerging from electromagnetic interactions between isolated atoms suggests that the universe contains principles of organization and meaning that transcend the simple mechanics of physical forces. Consciousness appears to represent a form of existence that bridges the gap between objective physical processes and subjective experiential reality. Through consciousness, the universe becomes not just a collection of matter and energy obeying physical laws, but a reality capable of knowing itself, of experiencing beauty and meaning, of creating art and literature and philosophy. In contemplating the impossibility of touch, we discover not limitation but liberation. We are freed from the illusion that meaningful connection requires physical contact, and open to the recognition that the most profound forms of relationship exist in the realm of information, meaning, and shared consciousness. The love between two people exists not in their ability to touch each other, but in their capacity to share information, experience, and meaning. The connection you feel to authors whose books have influenced you exists not through physical contact, but through the transmission of ideas across space and time. The understanding that touch is impossible also reveals the preciousness of the illusion that consciousness creates from electromagnetic interaction. Every moment of apparent physical contact becomes a celebration of the remarkable capacity of awareness to generate meaningful experience from the fundamental forces of physics. The sensation of touching another person represents not just a simple physical interaction, but a sophisticated translation of electromagnetic field dynamics into human experience, a bridge between the realm of matter and the realm of mind. As we reach toward the close of this extended meditation on the nature of touch and the reality of separation, we find ourselves not with answers, but with a deepened appreciation for the mysteries that surround us. The impossibility of contact reveals the sophistication of consciousness, the preciousness of the illusions that make experience meaningful, and the remarkable capacity of information processing systems to create beauty, significance, and connection from the raw material of electromagnetic forces. In a universe where nothing ever truly touches anything else, consciousness emerges as the great translator, the bridge between isolation and connection, the creator of meaning from the mathematics of repulsion. Through the gift of awareness, electromagnetic interactions become touch, atomic isolation becomes the foundation for intimacy, and the loneliness of matter becomes the starting point for love, art, science, and all the other magnificent expressions of conscious existence. The story of touch, which began with the recognition that it is impossible, ends with the understanding that its impossibility makes it more rather than less remarkable. In transforming electromagnetic forces into experiences of connection, consciousness performs a kind of magic that transcends the limitations of matter while remaining grounded in the physical processes from which it emerges. We are beings of separated atoms who nonetheless experience connection, isolated particles who nonetheless feel love, electromagnetic fields who nonetheless know beauty and meaning. Perhaps this is the deepest truth about touch and consciousness and the human condition, that our most profound experiences emerge not from overcoming the fundamental limitations of physical reality, but from the remarkable capacity of awareness to create meaning within and despite these limitations. We are star stuff contemplating its own nature, electromagnetic patterns pondering their own existence, information processing systems capable of experiencing wonder at their own operation. In the gentle recognition that we have never touched anything, we discover not sadness but amazement at the sophisticated illusions that make existence beautiful and meaningful. Every apparent touch becomes a celebration of consciousness. Every sensation of contact becomes evidence of the remarkable capacity of awareness to transcend while remaining embedded in the electromagnetic dance that constitutes all material reality. The loneliness of atoms becomes the foundation for the connection of minds. The isolation of matter becomes the starting point for the community of consciousness, and the impossibility of touch becomes the very reason why the illusion of touch is such a precious and necessary gift. In understanding what we cannot do, we discover the magnificence of what consciousness accomplishes every moment of every day, transforming the fundamental separateness of matter into the experience connection that makes existence meaningful and beautiful. The universe, built upon the principle that nothing can touch anything else, becomes through consciousness a reality where meaning touches meaning, where information connects across vast distances, where love transcends the electromagnetic barriers that keep atoms forever apart. In this transformation lies perhaps the deepest mystery and the greatest gift of conscious existence. The capacity to create connection from separation, meaning from mechanism, and beauty from the basic forces that govern reality at its most fundamental level.